It's weird to know the insides of people's houses better than we know the people right now.
Okay, we are going live right now.
Okay. So are we set, Bob?
We are live.
Perfect, thank you. Looks like it's 8 o'clock and we can get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for your interest, for being here. And it's probably safe to say thank you to everybody for all the work that it took to get ready for these meetings, because it does take a lot and it's appreciated. I'm Mary Wall, Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission Chair. I'm from Langlois and am appointed from the 4th CD. And I'll call the December 11th Fish and Wildlife Commission meeting to order. Let's do introductions. Vice Chair Woolley, if you'll start.
Good morning, I'm Greg Woolley, and I represent Congressional District 3, which is the Portland metro area, and I'm Vice Chair of the Commission.
Thank you. And Commissioner Zarnowitz.
So I'm Jill Zarnowitz, and I represent District 1 and the rest of the state too, but not as my area.
Thank you. Commissioner Hatfield Hyde.
Hi, good morning. I'm Becky Hatfield Hyde, and I am in Congressional District 2, but like Jill, we, take on issues for the whole state.
Thank you. And Commissioner Spellbrink.
Good morning, Bob Spellbrink from District 5, Sluts, Oregon, and glad to be here this morning.
Thank you. And Commissioner Labhart.
Good morning, everybody. Mark Labhart. I'm the at-large position for Eastern Oregon, and it's snowing in Sisters this morning.
Whoa. Director Melcher, would you like to introduce yourself as well, please?
Well, thank you. I'm Kurt Melcher. I'm the Director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
And I think before we get into the meeting, we'll ask Kristen Wright, and welcome back, Kristen, if you'll do the logistics for the platform.
Great, thank you. Good morning. My name is Kristen Wright, and I work for the National Policy Consensus Center at Portland State University. I'm here to support the commission and ODF&W staff to be able to hold this commission meeting virtually through Zoom. So just a few comments to orient us all to Zoom. Only the commissioners and presenting or participating staff will be visible on the screen. And to help with communication and meeting management, we ask for commissioners and participating staff to please keep yourself muted to limit background noise. You can find your mute button at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And we ask that you just wait until you're recognized by either the chair or vice chair before unmuting yourself to speak. We will use the digital hand raise feature to signal if you have a question or comment and wait to be recognized by the chair. You can find this feature by clicking on the participants logo at the bottom of your screen. This will bring up a participants list to the right, and at the bottom of that list, you will have a raise hand icon. The chat feature is available to participants and commissioners, but as it can be distracting for meeting participants, we ask that you limit your use of chat in the meeting and understand that this chat will also be saved as part of the public record. If you are a non-participating attendee, you will not be visible on the screen, and you will not be able to mute or unmute yourself. Some of you observing attendees may be asked to participate in the meeting, and at that time, I'll announce that I'm switching your role from an observing attendee to a participant. You'll see a small blip on your screen, and then you will be able to unmute yourself to speak and to start your video. And then once your participation is complete, you'll be moved back to an observing attendee status. For those of you who are giving public testimony, you'll notice on the screen there will be a timer available, which will show your allotted time. Lastly, if we have technical issues or if there's a meeting disruption like a Zoom bombing type of thing, I will try to remove that person first, and then if needed, I'll end the meeting and restart it. So if that were to happen, you would need to log back in using the Zoom link you used to enter this meeting now. Okay, I think that's it. We're glad that you're here on Zoom and on the YouTube stream. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Chair Wall.
Thank you, Kristen. It's great to have Portland State helping with these meetings like this. So I will just mention a couple things about logistics. We do have what looks like a fairly short agenda. I'm not going to jinx that by predicting an end time. We will take occasional breaks, and if it runs up toward noon, we'll figure out whether to stop for lunch. We do have an executive session as our last item, so we'll temporarily close out the regular Fish and Wildlife Commission meeting, convene the executive session, and then restart the regular commission meeting to officially adjourn. So with that, thank you again for being here and to staff for all the preparation for this meeting. And I will turn it over to Director Melcher for the director's report.
Well, thank you, Chair Wall, and good morning to our, whatever it is, 9th or so Zoom commission meeting. We do have a number of items under the director's report to cover today. We did provide the field reports in written form and would be standing by if there are any questions that you'd like addressed related to that report. I do have Erica Kleiner here in the room next door, prepared to give you the expenditure report. Erica?
All right. Thank you and good morning, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Woolley, and commissioners. For the record, I am Erica Kleiner, Deputy Director for Administration. So my report today is going to be pretty brief. I know you're all anxious to dive into the details of the governor's recommended budget, but I did want to touch on a few things. So we're still trending in a direction of growth with really healthy license sales. November was another strong month, although this is typically a leaner time of the year for us. So November license sales revenue was up over 30% from 1 year ago, while the number of licensed products sold in November increased just a bit below 20%. And we're making strides with our customer retention plan. We just recently sent out a survey to approximately 10,000 new customers. So we're hoping that the information that comes back from that survey helps us really refine the tools and resources we need to keep those folks engaged with both fishing and hunting. And our unrestricted cash balance is holding pretty steady. It sits at just under $60 million. Expenditures at this point in the biennium are tracking right where they should be, as is revenue. Budget development, again, we'll have an update for you all on the governor's recommended budget in the next agenda item. So we'll get into the details of that. And then for audit updates, we are making progress in securing an internal audit services provider. So we're hiring a contractor. That position currently sits vacant, but we are initiating a request for quotes from vendors on the statewide price agreement and hoping to award a contract to one of those vendors. And our audit topic, again, will be fishing charter and guide services utilization of coupon books for issuing fishing licenses. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, questions of Erica? I don't see any. I do have one, Erica, about the, I understand that we have a good sense of how many hunters and fishers are getting licenses, so we know what the increase is, and it's eye-opening how big that increase is. What do we know about the influx of people who are hiking and birding and camping and trying to get outside and are also really interested in the fish wildlife habitat assets that the state has?
So I think some of the questions in their survey touch on kind of recreation, hiking, and bird watching and things like that. So we're hoping that some of the data that comes back better informs that because we really don't have a whole lot of information on that at this point in time.
Just a quick follow-up, the questions are going to people that are buying licenses. Is that the case? So the 10,000 people that are buying licenses, but not people that are outside that?
Yeah, Chair Wall, it is people who are buying licenses, but there are some questions that touch on those other aspects of recreation.
Okay, thank you. I don't see other hands up, so shall we go ahead with the rest of your report then?
Yeah, and Chair Wall and Commissioners, before we did that, I would just add to your question, Chair Wall, that while we don't have, statistical data on hiking or other outdoor activity participants, we certainly have a lot of anecdotal information from our partner agencies, which indicates that activity is up as well. In the case of fishing and hunting licenses, of course, because we require a license, we have direct empirical information. But I think across the board, all the other agencies are reporting, quite significant increases in those outdoor activities.
That's helpful, actually. Thank you. Do you have the sense, Director Melcher, that it's a similar size? Like, I think ours was 150,000 or something new fishers and hunters. Do you have any sense at all if the proportions are the same on the other activities, or?
I would say not a strong sense, but it would not surprise me if the increase in those other activities is even greater. And for instance, just where we do have little snapshots of empirical data, like just recently we heard the report from Crater Lake National Park, and I'll probably get my numbers wrong, but I'll have them in the ballpark. I think typically over a Thanksgiving weekend, they see something like 200 visitors. And this year, I think it was something like 700 visitors.
Wow.
So, and there's many kind of snapshots like that from other agencies, but it doesn't really, we don't have it rolled up into the universal total across all those activities.
Thank you.
Chair Wall, one thing we do have is we do have data on parking permits. So those are way up. I don't have a percentage off the top of my head, but folks who are purchasing the parking permits at our wildlife areas, that's up quite significantly.
Thank you. That's a good point. Thanks. It looks like Commissioner Spellbrink is looking for a question.
Actually, that was going to be my question. I was going to comment on the parking permits, because I notice every year, excuse me, every year when I get my license, I get the parking permit, and I was wondering if that you answered that in the last little bit there. So thanks.
Thank you. I think that's it on those questions. I don't see other hands, so.
Very good. We'll go to Erica and Brandy Nichols to give us an overview and update on the governor's recommended budget. And just a comment before they begin. Of course, once the governor, we had our agency requested budget, which the commission finalized back in June, I believe. No, it was July. And then once the governor releases her recommended budget, that budget essentially becomes our budget. So you will see the department advocating and lobbying vigorously to implement the governor's recommended budget. That is now our budget. So thank you. Go ahead, Erica and Brandy.
All right, thank you. Chair Wall, Vice Chair Woolley, Commissioners, again, for the record, I'm Erica Kleiner, Deputy Director for Administration. I'll be co-presenting today with Brandy Nichols. Brandy is ODFW's Acting Budget and Economic Services Manager. And Brandy is going to be navigating the slide deck. And I'll get us through the first several slides, and then she will complete the presentation. I'll just check in. Is everyone seeing these slides okay? They appear a bit large on my screen.
Yeah, we're only seeing the top roughly third or quarter of each slide, it looks like.
All right, so Brandy, can you try to adjust the size so we can see those slides?
There.
Is that better, Commissioners? Is that better, everyone?
Yes, it is on mine.
Do you want to go to the slideshow mode, or is that what you did before?
That was what I did last time.
Created the issue. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll work with this.
Okay.
So I'll kick us off here. I'm going to start today with an overview of kind of the flow of the presentation. So I'll begin with a brief recap of what we accomplished during earlier phases of the budget development process. For context, I'm going to touch on an overview of Governor Brown's priorities that were used to frame our budget and other state agency budgets. And next, I'm going to cover all the adjustments that the governor's budget makes to our base budget. And after I cover the base budget adjustments, Brandy is going to present on the policy option packages that have been incorporated into the governor's budget. All right, so at this point, you all are pretty well versed in the budget timeline, but just to do a quick recap, some of you were engaged in the first public step of our budget process, which was our external budget advisory committee. So Chair Wall, Commissioner Zarnowitz, thanks for your participation in that process. Next, you all weighed in on the proposed agency request budget that we brought to you in June. You all gave some feedback and we made some adjustments. We brought that back to you in July and you approved the proposed agency request budget then. The budget was officially submitted to the Chief Financial Office on September 1st. And of course, Governor Brown released her budget on December 1st. And our next step will be to present this budget. As Director Melcher mentioned, this is now our budget and we will lobby for it. We will bring it forward to legislative session. We will present to it and then have a final budget at the end of legislative session. This next slide reflects a few of the main themes that are captured in agency budget. So Governor Brown has a really clear commitment to dismantling systematic racism and also providing support and assistance to mitigate impacts from the pandemic and from the recent wildfires. And I did want to mention that the governor's budget does also focus on challenges outside of those kind of main key themes. And some of those are climate change and risks to water. And the really neat thing with this budget is you can see just a really clear connection between the governor's priorities and where she chose to invest in our budget. And I also wanted to just note that the governor's recommended budget narrative goes into a tremendous amount of detail on these priorities and just outlines them really, really well. I'm just doing the broad brushstroke, but more information can be found in that narrative document. And in looking at the overall budget numbers, you can see that all fund types have increases in 2021-23, with the exception of lottery funds. And what happened with lottery funds coming into 21-23 is that there was available lottery funding on the table back during the 2019 legislative session. So Legislative Fiscal Office did a one-time fund shift of 17 native fish conservation positions from general fund and onto lottery funds. And that was one time, so it did not become part of our base budget for 2021-23. This will connect to one of the base budget adjustments I'll talk you through. There is another fund shift for these positions, so just noting that connection. All right, as a reminder, we build our budget in 3 basic phases. So the first phase is our base budget, which is just our 2019-21 legislatively adopted budget, plus any interim adjustments. So adjustments made either at an emergency board or special session. We then build in inflationary factors to account for growth as people and things cost more over time. And then we incorporate our policy option package. And it's very normal that we have base budget adjustments. It happens every biennium, kind of a normal part of the process. So jumping right into the first package that contains base budget adjustments, it's package 90. This is kind of the big one. In this case, the package includes several adjustments to mitigate a statewide general fund budget gap. So overall, this package reduces ODFW's general fund and increases other funds and federal funds expenditure limitation. So the governor's budget has a few adjustments for fish division and a couple for administration. The first is a fund shift of 17 native fish conservation positions from general fund to federal funds. So I talked about the reason why our lottery funds go down in 2021-23. This is connected to this package. So another fund shift in the 2021-23 biennium from general fund to federal funds. The second adjustment is a proposed reduction to eliminating 2 technician positions at Rock Creek Hatchery. And the final proposed reduction is a fund shift of the the general fund portion of 3 fish screens and passage positions onto federal funds. And then I mentioned a couple adjustments for administration. The first is a fund shift of the general fund portion of our state government service charges onto other funds. And the second, we're really excited about, we have the addition of a new position. It's a diversity, equity, and inclusion position funded with state general fund. And this came out of a subcommittee of the Racial Justice Council that focuses on environmental equity and access. And this position is also funded with general fund and a few other natural resource agency budgets. So really, really pleased to see that. All right, the next 5 packages that I'm going to talk about, these are all packages that are kind of consistently applied across all state agency budgets. Package 91 and 92, the first one, 91, reduces funding and expenditure limitation, and it essentially just backs out the inflationary factor that we build in during budget development. So we typically build in a 3 to 3.5% inflationary factor for our services and supplies accounts. And so the governor's budget removes that. And the same thing applies to package 92. That one's a little bit different. During budget build, we assume a certain level of vacancies for the biennium, and we use a standard calculation or formula to do that. And this package just builds on that and assumes more vacancies. So for that reason, it backs out the funding associated with that assumption, as well as the expenditure limitation. All right, moving on to packages 96 and 97. So package 96 reduces our other funds expenditure limitation by 3.4 million. And this is just aligning us with the Department of Administrative Services budget. So this package is due to a timing issue. So DAS trues up their budget over time, and there's changes between agency request budget and governor's recommended budget. And so we're just aligning to those changes. And for package 97, we're doing the same thing to align with Department of Justice's budget. All right, so the next package, package 99, is the final base budget adjustment. So ODFW, along with the rest of the state of Oregon, is in the process of transitioning to Microsoft 365, which is a cloud-based service intended to provide better productivity, better security, and just allowing us to collaborate better with other state agencies. So it's Microsoft kind of suite of products. We're transitioning away from a standalone approach to procuring those services to doing that as a package with the rest of state government. So for that reason, that limitation is getting backed out of our budget, and we'll pay for those services through our state government service charges. All right, so that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to hand the reins over to Brandy, and Brandy is going to cover all of the budgetary enhancements. So all of the policy option packages that have been incorporated into the governor's budget. So Brandy.
All right, good morning, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Willie, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Brandy Nichols, Budget and Economic Services Manager here. And as Erica mentioned, our governor's recommended budget does include some enhancements that we are really excited about. And so that's what I'm going to spend the rest of this presentation talking about with you, is those policy option packages. So if you recall from our agency request budget, we submitted 24 policy option packages, and of those 24, the 12 listed in the table here on the screen are included in the governor's recommended budget. So I will go through these packages and share just a brief recap with you of what's included in each package. So starting off with our voluntary access and habitat incentive program, this package provides $2.1 million of federal fund expenditure limitation, which lets ODFW continue to provide grant money for landowners to allow hunting access on their lands. And the federal funding for this grant program comes from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, their Natural Resource Conservation Service. So our next package are habitat tools for Oregon coast and beyond. This package converts one existing limited duration position to permanent full-time and also provides around $225,000 in other funds expenditure limitation. And so this position will be able to continue current work, developing and implementing tools that model stream flows and fish species distributions in Oregon. And I apologize, I realized I forgot to turn on my video. So let me get that taken care of. There, okay, I apologize for that. Now you can see who's actually talking to you. So I'll continue back with Habitat Tools package. So again, that position will be able to continue work developing and implementing tools that model stream flows and fish species distributions in Oregon. And the funding for this package will come from both Oregon Department of Transportation and the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. So next package included is our culvert fish passage package. This package gives us $2.8 million in other funds expenditure limitation and continues the existing limited duration position that we have under this package. And so through an interagency agreement that we have with ODOT, ODOT provides funding that's used to support projects to repair culverts around the state that are used for fish passage. So our next package that we have included is our Central Oregon Irrigation District Mitigation and Enhancement Coordinator. And so what this package does for us is it converts one existing seasonal biological science assistant position up to a permanent full-time natural resource specialist one position. And the price difference in doing that is right around $105,000. And so this package gives us that additional other funds limitation to accomplish that. So the Central Oregon Irrigation District provides the funding for this package. And what we gain from reclassifying the position here in this package is that we're better able to meet the obligations that are outlined in the mitigation and enhancement agreement that we have with the irrigation district. That work will be better done by a higher classified or a position with a higher classification. Moving on to our application development positions, this package converts two existing limited duration positions up to permanent full-time. And this one is actually a net zero package where it just shifts funding from between expenditure categories. And so by keeping these positions going and making them permanent full-time, those positions work within our information services division, and they will be able to continue the work they do to support development and maintenance of various mobile and internet-based software applications, which we have quite a few here at this agency. Next package we were given is our Recreational Fisheries Project Coordinator. This package also converts one existing limited duration position to permanent full-time and provides $275,000 other funds expenditure limitation in order to accomplish that. And again, having this position continue permanently increases the agency's capacity for various hatchery and fishing access related projects. And the funding for this package actually comes from our license surcharge fund, which is dedicated specifically to restoration and enhancement. So the next two packages I'll talk about are related to the agency's ongoing work to tackle and take care and address deferred maintenance needs around the agency at our facilities that need that repair and maintenance. So package 110 is our main deferred maintenance package, and this gives us $10 million in other funds expenditure limitation and a bond issuance for the general obligation bond funding that could go towards these critical deferred maintenance projects at our facilities that are most in need of repairs. So this package provides the funding to continue that work, that the ongoing work that we're doing, and is really we look at it as phase 2 of the bond funding we were granted back in our 2017-19 budget to start this deferred maintenance work. And another component of this package also gives us 3 new limited duration positions to support these deferred maintenance projects and the work that needs to be done with those projects. And so next package really goes right along with our main deferred maintenance package. Package 111 gives us $1.1 million in general fund to use for debt service of the new bond issuance that will fund the deferred maintenance projects back there in package 110. So the next package I'll talk about is our Habitat Division package. So POP 112, Habitat Division establishment. This does establish a new Habitat Division as a standalone division here in the agency. It realigns existing programs and positions. I have those listed on the screen so you can see those. These are the same program realignments that were included in our original request with agency request budget. So hopefully these are familiar to you. This package also adds 2 new federally funded positions that will provide division leadership and administrative support for the new division. One thing I will note is that in the governor's recommended budget, this package was modified from our agency request budget, which included a request for 7 new general funded positions. So moving on, these next 3 packages, these are standalone policy option packages, but they were submitted and included under the new Habitat Division that was established back with package 112. So our Willamette Basin Complex Water Issues package, this provides 3 new permanent full-time positions and with $700,000 in general fund to allow ODFW to participate with the Oregon Water Resources Department in the Willamette Basin water reallocation effort. Next, our Good Neighbor Authority Coordinator. This package provides one new limited duration position, along with federal funds expenditure limitation at $240,000 and $35,000 other funds expenditure limitation for the match funding. So this package will allow ODFW to continue forest, rangeland, and watershed restoration activities, all under the Good Neighbor Authority. Federal funding for this package comes from both the U.S. Forest Service and Pittman-Robertson Act funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And finally, package 119, our Jordan Cove Energy Project Liaison. This package also provides 1 new limited duration position, along with $300,000 other funds expenditure limitation. And this position would be a point of contact for both Jordan Cove project staff and other technical consultants when it comes to reviewing construction permit applications. And the funding for this package would come from the Jordan Cove project entity. So those are the 12 policy option packages that are included in our governor's budget. The last slide I'll talk us through is just to make a mention of our continuation packages that were requested in our agency request budget, but are not included in governor's recommended budget. So the first of those are our Oregon Conservation Strategy Farm Bill Biologist packages. So both of these 2 packages together would convert 4 existing limited duration positions to permanent full-time and had requested one new permanent full-time natural resource specialist 2 position. And these positions work to implement conservation practices that are included in the federal Farm Bill. Within these packages, $700,000 of federal funding comes from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and $200,000 lottery funds have been designated as the match funding here. Next one I'll talk about is our Klamath reintroduction and monitoring biologist position. So this package would have continued one existing limited duration position that assists with the reintroduction work of anadromous fish into the Klamath River Basin. And this position was also identified to develop a reintroduction plan for sockeye salmon in Wallowa Lake. This was from work that was included in another policy option package of ours, number 118. And that package for the Wallowa Lake sockeye salmon was also not included in governor's budget. And the last package I'll talk about is our deferred maintenance facilities engineer. This package would continue one existing limited duration position. And this position is using funding from our current deferred maintenance bond funding that we were granted back with our 2017-19 budget. And this position has been focusing on the design and execution of our current deferred maintenance projects, again, that's using that bond funding that we were given last biennium. So with that, that takes us through my recap of the policy option packages and concludes our presentation. Erica and I are both here and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you both. We do have a question from Commissioner Labhart, and I believe we have a couple other commissioners who want to ask questions. So Commissioner Labhart.
Great, thank you, Chair Wall. Erica, good morning. Sorry, I should have probably called you ahead of time about this question, but I tried to look through the governor's recommended budget to see where, if there was any additional authorization put into capital projects as a result of the fires that either damaged or destroyed facilities, because there's going to be federal dollars that we're going to need authorization for from the match from FEMA, and then the match dollars that the department would have to come up with. Does that show in the new budget anywhere? I don't think I could find it anywhere. Or how is that going to be handled?
So Chair Wall and Commissioner Labhart, so we are pursuing through DAS Risk and our insurance companies a reimbursement for facilities. So we're pursuing that right now. We're also simultaneously working through FEMA to hopefully secure some federal disaster aid funding. So that work's all going on now. You're not going to see anything in the 2021-23 governor's recommended budget directly. When we know how much limitation and things like that we'll need, we'll go and ask for it. So right now we're working through the process. We're trying to align estimates with the insurance companies and kind of secure that funding through the insurance path and through the FEMA path.
Okay, so you're thinking that the authorization that you would need to do that, you can do that in this biennial budget, even though probably the work isn't going to happen until the next biennium, correct?
Yeah, it's going to take some time to work through that process. I think we have a little bit of a road in front of us there. But whenever we kind of finalize and firm things up and things are well known in terms of numbers, we'll work with our analysts to find the appropriate time to get limitation to spend that money.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
Right, and if I could just add to that to put a finer point on it, that Chair Wall and Commissioner Labhart, that's exactly what the emergency board is for. So we the legislature doesn't give us empty limitation. We don't even know what limitation we would need to ask for yet, because we don't know how much or what the reimbursement will be. So when we do know what that number is, we will go to the emergency board to get the limitation in order to implement. Thanks.
Commissioner Zarnowitz, and then Commissioner Woolley.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is for Erica or for Brandy, but I noticed that a lot of the general fund was moved to federal fund. And I'm just wondering, do we have any federal funds to cover those?
So Chair Wall and Commissioner Zarnowitz, thanks for the question. I can answer that one. We're working through that now. In some cases, this might mean a program reduction if available federal funds, can't be identified. But we're still kind of working through what this means for the budget. And of course, this is our budget now. It's what we'll carry forth during the legislative session, and we will present to it. But we still have a bit of a lengthy road. We've got the legislative process to work through. Part of our budget presentation will include public testimony. So a bit of a lengthy road here, but we're still working through kind of what the ramifications of the fund shifts would mean.
Other questions? Commissioner Woolley.
Okay, thank you, Chair Wall, and good morning, Erica and Brandy. So from my view, we came out pretty well. And I'm really happy that our Habitat Division is getting established. I know we weren't sure if we would even maybe just get an administrator to start with. We actually have positions. We don't have every position that we wanted, but I think we're off to a really good start. Just a couple questions. With POP 105 with the Fish Passage culvert repair, are those culverts already prioritized? I know we went through an exercise and approved a few years ago priority culverts. Do we need to go through that again, or are those pretty well prioritized moving forward?
So thank you, Vice Chair Woolley, for the question. Chair Wall, Commissioners, what I know about that process is that those culvert projects are identified and by our agency with statewide passage priorities, and we look to where there's willing landowners and cooperative stakeholders. I'm sorry, I'm not intimately familiar with how that prioritization process actually works. So if maybe if Director Melcher has any insight he can add, or we could follow up and get a better answer to that question for you.
Well, thanks. And Brandy pretty much covered it. We do have a prioritization list of culverts. These funds, what we're asking for here is the limitation, because we have the funds from ODOT through our culvert pilot project with ODOT. So we have the funds, and in order to be able to apply those funds, we need the limitation to do that. And then the funds are applied basically based on the priority list, but of course there are other considerations. We don't just unilaterally go use our funds to replace a culvert unless we have landowner and cooperator agreements. So, but basically the list is used.
Okay, thanks. And my other question is, just in general, which POPs that were most desirable or most highly ranked, that we wanted, did we not get? What do you feel is most lacking in the budget that we were really hoping to get this time?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Woolley, I think you noted this a few minutes ago. This is a good budget. Overall, we're very, very happy with where we're at this point in the process. I have the ranking of POPs in front of me when we met with you in July. All of the kind of top, looks like 5 ranked POPs are included. So overall, I would just say we did really well. I don't think, we're feeling like beyond what Brandy covered, some of our continuation programs weren't incorporated. But overall, we're just very happy with where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. No,
I would just add to that, Commissioner or Vice Chair Woolley and Chair Wall, for us, the 6 positions that are essentially slated for elimination at the end of the biennium that are all continuation positions, the Oregon Conservation Strategy positions, the Klamath Reintroduction position, the Deferred Maintenance Engineer. Those are all positions and programs that we will continue to have discussions with the governor's office through the legislative budget process. So we will be continuing to talk to the governor's office about those continuation requests as we go through the process.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions also, Erica, that I wanted to ask. And I agree with what people have said, that we're in great shape, especially given the kind of year that we're coming out of. So kudos to all of you for that. On the 17 positions that we would be shifting onto federal funds if we move forward with that one, is that a situation where we could be asked to shift other among our programs that are already on federal funds, or not likely to be? Is that not typically how that would happen? Do we just go search for new federal funds? Is that what would be the most likely case?
So Chair Wall, thanks for the question. You know, I think we're still trying to work through that. It's still kind of, you know, early on in the process. You know, those positions are all kind of doing field surveys and data collection for the native fish program. So certainly it's important work. But the native fish program hasn't yet had a chance to really work through. And part of that reason is this wasn't one of the items on our initial reductions list. So we just need some time to really work through kind of how the agency will make that work. And then we'll bring that information forth to the legislative process. So I can't answer your question right now. We need to do a little bit more digging to find out kind of what is available in terms of sport fish restoration monies and how that would work. And if a program reduction would be necessary to make that work.
Thank you. And if there's a list of those 17 positions and what they do, that would be great if we could get it later on. A general question, you mentioned in the governor's recommended budget narrative, there is fairly clear information about the priorities for the state going into the next biennium. And I know what the governor's budget does with our habitat division, but are there other places where you feel that our budget has more resources or more focus on climate change as a result of what's just come out in the governor's recommended?
Yeah, Chair Wall, thanks for the question. Not outside of what we presented today. I think, you know, the establishment of the Habitat Division is a huge opportunity for ODFW to really do some of that work and kind of bring everything together, consolidate it, focus the habitat work. So that's really the opportunity. I would say the other package is the water package, the 3 new water positions that are funded with state general fund. That plays into that as well.
And to follow up on that part of it, are the WRD positions also dependent on new funding in the governor's recommended? Our 3 positions would be working with WRD on those, as I understand it. And I wonder if they both rely on new general fund.
Chair Ball, and thank you for your question. I believe that is the case, but we'd be happy to follow up and confirm that and confirm that answer for you. But yes, I believe that is the case.
Great, thank you. One more question. The insurance money, the self-insurance money, is that unrestricted if it comes to us or as it comes to us? And is it treated as general fund when it does?
Chair Wall, thank you for that question. Officially in the budget and the state accounting system, the reimbursement funding that we would get both from FEMA or from our DAS insurance policy, we would be treating that as other funds.
Thank you. And the last question is probably for you, Director Melcher. Does our response on after the fire does it, or all the fires, does it include transferring more fish among rivers and basins? So we would be doing more of that, or are we still working hard not to transfer fish between basins?
Well, I think I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. When you say transfer fish between basins, do you mean just move them to different rearing facilities in the basin, or do you mean actually releasing them in different locations?
More the latter than the former, but I would,
Okay.
I could follow up later on the former, but I'm
Yeah.
interested if we're actually releasing, that we'll be in a position where we feel like we have no choice but to release more of them in different basins.
At this point, I don't think that's the case. I think largely our hatchery production programs are, they have federal, in most cases, federal permits that go with them that describe where fish can be released. So I don't think it substantially changes the releases in the future, with one exception, and that would be we are looking at our catchable trout releases. And we may modify those if there's areas that just don't have suitable water quality or have severe habitat issues, we may not release catchable trout in those areas in the future. So we're reviewing that. But as far as the big hatchery production side, I don't believe it changes our releases.
Thank you. That helps. And I don't see other questions from the commissioners. So thank you and congratulations on being in this position with our budget. It's a nice position to be in.
Thank you.
So I think back to you, Director Melcher, for the temporary rules.
Very good. Then commissioners, we have 5 temporary rules here that require ratification, and we're standing by to answer any questions you might have about those.
I don't see questions yet from other commissioners. I do have one about number 147 and 150, both of which are dealing with lifting the restrictions on low flow and then some closures. And I wonder if there's somebody on the line that can answer what we know about the Coquille and Elk River that drives us to prohibit harvest of fall Chinook in those. And if not, I can get an answer later on that one.
Okay, well, let me start and then we'll see who. Oh, it looks like Chris Kern is Skyping me and he says he can be moved over into the panel to discuss this. And so while Kristen is moving Chris Kern over, I would just say that we certainly have some preliminary numbers on the Coquille, and returns are improved over the last couple of years, but still not very good. And I see Chris is now with us now. So Chris, take it away.
Can I check audio? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, good morning, Commissioners, Chair Wall. I think if your question was what led us to enact those restrictions in those 2 systems in particular, it was we've seen a couple of years now of pretty dramatically low spawner returns in the Coquille, and then not so dramatically different in the elk, but definitely forecast was for less on the wild side, and so we went in that basin with a hatchery only rule this year. So, and if that was your question, there we go. If not, let me know and I can answer something else.
That was my question. Thank you both. And just a quick follow-up on the other area rivers, we're not prohibiting, like in the 6s and the New River. Do we know that those are much better, or we're still trying to figure out, do more monitoring in those to know if they're in situations similar to like the Coquille and elk?
Chair Wall, good question. Thank you. Generally speaking, the Coquille's the one that's the most dramatically poor, and we've been surveying all those systems. We do so every fall. I don't know what the current status of surveys for the 6s is. I've gotten some numbers for the elk, but frankly, I'd have a hard time putting them in context for you today. My sense is they're about like we expected. Elk, as you're probably well aware, is a little bit later timed than some of the other systems, so we're much further along on sort of the more northerly systems in terms of monitoring. And what I understand so far is they're pretty close to what we expected. The exception being the North Coast, Tillamook area, those kind of streams, a little better than we expected. The Mid Coast seems to be pretty close. And then the Chetco and Winchuck, many of these areas did have bag restrictions during the season. So not quite full closure like the Coquille was, but definitely quite a bit of restrictions to adapt to this year's forecast. And for the low flow, the Chetco and Winchuck, the only change we've made is based on the rainfall, we've been able to pull back the low flow restrictions, but the bag restrictions that were put in place in those systems are still in place. So including, I don't have them in front of me, but it's a restricted daily bag limit and a rack your rod rule and some other things as well. Those remain in place.
Thank you. That's helpful. Commissioner Spellbrink, you had your hand up. Do you still want to ask a question? You're on. There we go.
Yeah, no, Chris kind of, while I had him there, I was going to ask him about the Mid Coast and the North Coast, and he told us what I wanted to know on that. Thanks.
Great. Seeing no other questions, do I hear a motion on these temporary rules, ratifying the temporary rules?
I would move to ratify the 5 temporary rules set forth in today's agenda.
I would second that.
Commissioner Labhart moved and Commissioner Spellbrink seconded a motion to ratify the temporary rules. Are there questions or discussion items? Seeing none, those in favor, can you do a thumbs up so we can see for the count? Looks like everybody says yes. Thank you. Then let's go on to, there aren't items on other business, so commission updates. I do want to mention one thing, and that is that the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is having their, it would usually be a conference in different parts of the West. It'll be virtual, of course, this year, but it's January 5th to 7th. Commissioner engagement is encouraged at those. And so Commissioner Woolley has been very active with that group and has led panels and that, and will continue to go again, but we could have 1 or 2 other commissioners. If you're interested, just let me know, if you will, as soon as you can after today's meeting. Anything you would add to that, Commissioner or Director Melcher?
No, Chair Wall, it sounds good. And yeah, if any 1 or 2 others want to participate, let the chair know. And if there's more than 1 or 2, she'll have to pick the winners and the losers, so to speak. But the sooner the better, because that is approaching quickly and we'll want to get you registered. Thanks.
I really encourage other commissioners to attend. And obviously it's not as fun as when we're all there in person, because a lot of times, it's those hallway conversations that really make a difference. But it's also nice to have company when I'm making the commissioner's report. It's nice to be able to kind of divvy that up and take different parts of it as we report out and kind of network with the other commissioners from around the West. So if you have an opportunity and have the time, I really encourage you to take advantage of it.
Great, thank you. The other 2 items, there are 2 more items for the commission updates. One was just a very quick check-in on the beaver management and trap check work groups. There are ongoing discussions to set up membership, and we'll have a fuller update in January from Vice Chair Woolley, who's taken the lead for us on those for the commissioner or for the commission. Is there anything you want to add now, Commissioner Woolley, or wait till January? Your choice.
Well, I would just say that as you said, we're still filling in a couple of positions, but I've also had some outreach from my fellow commissioners that are interested in this. A couple of them. I was able to talk with Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde, who has a lot of interest in the beaver trapping committee, and of course her position. Her role as a rancher in the part of the world that she's in, and her collaborative nature, I think would be a great addition to helping to support my work with that commission. And I haven't had a chance to talk with Commissioner Zarnowitz, but I've also heard that you also have a great interest in the trap check committee. And so we'll circle back. And anyway, so I welcome that help. Also just in finishing pulling the committees together, and then also moving forward with involvement in the actual meetings themselves. So thank you for that support. I appreciate it.
And thank you for your ongoing work on that. There's so much interest in those from the public and people who have testified in the past and worked on that. So we'll hear more in January and appreciate your work on it. Any questions to Commissioner Woolley? Then let me give you an update, if I could, about our work with the Columbia River Joint Management discussions with Washington. They recently amended their Columbia River policy, and one result, as you all know, is that we in Washington are out of concurrence on management policies. A subcommittee of our Oregon Commission did go ahead and meet with Washington to get a briefing on their new policy, and we're responding to Washington with a letter. Next in the process of discussing this with Washington would be that both states want to focus first on the resource and conservation, and we're hoping to meet with them in January after our Fish and Wildlife Commission meeting to initiate those discussions. And to, as I mentioned, start with a focus on protecting the fish, increasing the runs, and in the context of each of the 4 H's and how those intersect. There is, of course, also a list of fairly significant processes going on related to the Columbia Basin, the 4-state or 4-governor process, other long-term efforts that we need to watch and try to make all of these make sense together. There's the Columbia River Basin Partnership that has morphed to some extent into and is working with the 4-state process. And there's ongoing work to protect Columbia River stocks by increasing spills over the lower Snake River dams. Our options now for the short term is, include, we could vote on the Washington proposal for Oregon as well. That process in Washington took a year, and it would take us many months to discuss all of that and get there. Another option would be for the 2 states to go our separate ways with Oregon's existing rule and Washington's new policy. That's probably the least acceptable solution for most people because it would be non-concurrent, significantly non-concurrent. Or we could rely on the current 2-state compromise that is in existence now it was for the 2020 season until we conclude these joint management discussions with Washington. So that's where we are right now. Greg, Jill, or Kurt, would any of the 3 of you like to add anything? And if not, then after that, I would like to ask a question to the commission, but wondered if anyone wanted to add anything. Director Melcher, you look like you're about to speak.
Yes, Chair. The only thing I would add is that I just got a text from Commissioner Hatfield Hyde and her power went out.
Uh-oh.
It says she can still hear us, but I don't know if she is able to engage or not. So that is what that's all I wanted to interject at this time.
Well, thank you. Sorry that's happening. A roof leak last meeting and now no power. So the question that I have to all of you, and I know we've been talking back and forth over the last, and a few of us were involved with the subcommittee, is whether you have concerns, questions, or comments on these as what I outlined as our approach and next steps. Just want to make sure that I get a sense of the commission that it works to proceed the way we're proceeding. Commissioner Zarnowitz.
Yes, yeah, I've been working with Mary or Commissioner Wall, and also been in the meetings. The Washington policy would be like Chair Wall said, a long struggle to get to follow it completely. And I think that we're looking at some sort of compromise down the road, but there's a lot of work that has to be done to try to figure that out in the meantime. And I guess that's what main thing I would say at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chair Wall, yeah, I feel that if we could have a middle path with Washington in the interim, I think that's best. Yeah, I don't sense that. I think it would be challenged to get to concurrence with what their current proposal is, and I don't know if everybody would be on board with that, including our governor. So I think if we could continue as we're going and so that we can stay in concurrence, and then also just continue the conversation. I feel like that's the best way for now.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback, and obviously more on this one later. With that, let's go to public forum. And we have 2 people signed up under public forum. I would like to mention on public forum that each person has 3 minutes. We do typically ask any questions that the commission wants to ask, or ask for follow-up consideration at some point by the staff, the department. We don't act on these because we're hearing information that people want to bring to us, and it's usually either the first time we've heard it, or it's certainly not something that's been teed up for us as an agenda item. So we don't typically act on these. That said, we have 2 of them. The first one is the Mule Deer Management Plan, and it's Mike Toddy. And Mike, I apologize if I got your last name wrong. So.
Well, good morning. Let's see. Let's start that as well. Good morning, Chair Wall, members of the Commission, Director Melcher. My name is Mike Toddy. I'm the Conservation Director for the Oregon Hunters Association, and I appreciate this opportunity to visit with you quickly this morning. Recently, the Commission received a letter from the Oregon Action Team for Ungulate Migration concerning a mule deer management plan update. You've been introduced to the Oregon Action Team, or OAT as we call ourselves at times. It's a network of like-minded conservation organizations that are promoting awareness and projects around ungulate migration within Oregon area, and also promoting and looking for future development of a migration policy, statewide policy for migration here in Oregon as well. So this letter was specific to the mule deer management plan. The current management plan was updated in 2003, and a lot has happened in the last 17 years with mule deer here in Oregon, and not all good, unfortunately. If we look across the management plan, or the area where mule deer inhabit Oregon, those numbers are down across most of that area, and in some areas significantly. And there's a number of reasons for that going on, everything ranging from loss of habitat, vehicle collisions, predation, things of that nature. So on the flip side, a number of good things have happened over the last 17 years as well. In 2009, the department undertook a project called the Mule Deer Initiative, where we've learned a lot about mule deer. We have an increased understanding of predator-prey relations with mule deer. We have an increased understanding of other species interactions with mule deer. For instance, where there's high elk populations, we now better understand how that's influencing mule deer habitat and mule deer numbers. Perhaps the most significant thing I think that's happened over the last 17 years has been the GPS collaring work that's happened with a large number of mule deer to help us really understand how mule deer are moving in Oregon, the habitats they're using, the migration routes they're using, and the implications of all those as we continue to develop more and more of that habitat into things like renewable energy sites and additional housing and things like that as we expand. With that, I'll just wrap up with a comment that our letter specifically asked the commission to instruct the department to update a mule deer management plan. I've had recent conversations personally with wildlife division staff, and indeed they are looking at the mule deer management plan and an update in 2021. So I wanted to recognize that, and when the department takes that on, obviously members from the Oregon Action Team and Oregon Hunters Association, we stand ready to assist and interact and engage as much as we can with the update of that plan. And with that, I'll conclude my comments and wish you all happy holidays and take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mike. I don't see the questions from the other commissioners yet, but there could be. I do have a question. Could you comment on what your group envisions from this request in terms of a systems perspective and the climate change context for this species and everything else? So could you just comment on that broader question of systems management?
Yeah, so Chair Wall, not completely certain what you're referring to as systems management, but I know with the update to the plan, you know, we're looking for a comprehensive update to the plan, stem to stern. And one of the things that as we look at the influences of climate change, whether it's more catastrophic wildfires and habitat, whether it's the expansion of renewable energy resource sites that we're seeing in critical mule deer winter range, things like that, those all should be included in a plan update.
Thank you. You actually managed to get at what I was asking.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
we do have two other questions. First, Commissioner Labhart and then Commissioner Spellbrink. Go ahead, Commissioner Labhart.
Thank you, Chair. Well, just a comment. I just want to thank Doug and Kevin for agreeing to take this on in 2021. It's an important topic and it needs to be addressed, and a 17-year-old plan definitely needs to be updated. So I just want to thank the staff for willing to take this on.
So we are moving forward. I'll ask that later. I'll come back to that later. Commissioner Spellbrink.
Just, excuse me again, just wanted to add my 100% agreement also. You know, I ever seem like everyone I talk to that hunted Eastern Oregon, and every time I find out someone that hunted over there, I ask them, you know, especially if they're longtime hunters over there, what they're seeing, what they feel. And I think I had one positive response. I should have logged how many people I talked to. I talked to an awful lot of people that hunted over there, and I think I had one positive response. Everything else was negative. So I agree 100%. It's time to look at the mule deer situation.
Thank you. I think that concludes the question. So thank you, Mike. And we'll go to David Moskowitz and public participation with the Commission and Oregon Coastal Winter Steelhead Fishing. David, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Wall, members of the Commission, Director Melcher. My name is David Moskowitz with the Conservation Angler. We're a wild fish conservation organization. I'm going to speak quickly to three topics this morning. I know that's probably shoehorning a few too many things in, but here we go. First is public participation with the Commission. The second is pressing pause on the fire-related agency action regarding hatcheries and habitat. And the third is addressing the impact of new angling regulations in Western Washington. First, to public participation. We believe that ODFW and the Commission have done a nice job establishing virtual forums during the COVID-19 pandemic. We commend that work. The Conservation Angler believes that public participation can be further improved with a few rule modifications, acquiring new software licenses, and revised scheduling coordination with Washington. Our recent letter suggests specific changes, and all are within the grasp of the department and the state, and we believe that these will help increase engagement with the public. Moving on to the fire reaction and related agency action. The Conservation Angler presented a memo to the Commission in November regarding this subject. Hatchery fish management actions have and still are occurring that may be in contravention to existing state rules and federal guidance. Habitat modification is occurring with little regard to the restoration needs of ESA species nor in coordination with fish-related agencies. There has not been any discussion about how these fire losses might be turned into opportunities to benefit Oregon's rivers, our wild fish, and local communities. And lastly, on a newly developing issue, WDFW just adopted emergency angling rules for coastal winter steelhead seasons from the Olympic Peninsula to Willapa Bay. These new rules prohibit fishing from a floating device, prohibit the use of bait and scents, require single barbless hooks, require release of all rainbow trout regardless of size, and impose a 1 hatchery fish steelhead bag limit. The conservation angler is concerned about the impacts of a shift in angler effort from Washington to Oregon, where the angling rules are more liberal and where wild steelhead escapements are also trending lower. Furthermore, the rate of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths from the COVID-19 pandemic are at much higher levels now than they were in the spring of 2020 when Oregon closed fishing, crabbing, and clamming to non-residents. The conservation angler urges the commission and the department to consider its options to proactively act and address the potential impacts of effort shift on Oregon wild steelhead and Oregon coastal communities. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you during this open public forum and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Are there questions from the commission? It looks like Commissioner Woolley.
Just a couple questions for Dave. Good morning, Dave. Regarding the public involvement, you proposed a kind of a few different ways of improving that. I mean, what do you feel would be the best out of what you brought up to consider?
Well, Chair Wall and Commissioner Woolley, thank you for that question. I do have a couple of specific suggestions. One, we would hope that, and we're sure that this already happens, that there's some coordination with Washington. In my letter, I note some of the conflicts with the Washington Commission. And so sometimes you're meeting on the same days. That may be unavoidable at times with other requirements on big game rules and the PFMC. I'm sure it's a tough Rubik's Cube, but to the extent you can avoid meeting on the same Friday, that would be helpful for those of us who work in both Washington and Oregon. The second one would be regarding the pre-registration. Washington enables public comment on agenda items that are essentially almost instantaneous. You have to register, but it can happen during the meeting, before the meeting. And the requirements that we do it 48 hours in advance for agenda items seems burdensome, and it may be limiting of public engagement. So we think that there could be a system that allows instant registration. Regarding the open public comment period, which we're in right now, we do really value that, and we hope it would come a regular standard agenda item, and also allow for a little bit more open registration for that as well. And finally, I work for a conservation group, and so being able to engage with the commission is part of my work plan and our organization's mission. But for the average public, meeting during a weekday is not always accessible to someone who may have a 9-to-5 job. The Washington Commission meets on Saturdays for half a day, and my interaction with them, I notice there's a lot of public engagement there. And I think that considering a Saturday commission meeting or a half-day meeting, it may take the pressure off the one-day meetings for the commission, and it would give the public a good chance. So those are our suggestions, and thank you very much for that question.
Okay, and then just one other question. I think you mentioned our fire response and hatchery, reconstruction, and it's a big ticket item. And were you implying that you feel that there's an alternative to that in terms of where we should allocate money and effort?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Woolley, I think there should be a discussion about this. We have, Rock Creek Hatchery sustained very significant damage. There was damage at Klamath and at Leeburg. Leeburg is a Corps of Engineers facility, so there needs to be some coordination with that manager. But with Rock Creek, it's a loss. It's being treated as a loss, but it also is an opportunity. That's the other side of the coin. And our organization believes that the department needs to take a very strong look at the entire hatchery production system and evaluate the facilities based on what did happen from the fires, which facilities were put at risk to the fires, but did not actually sustain damage. But with climate change impacts, we believe these facilities are going to come under increasing risk of fire and also of water shortages because of changes in precipitation and climate that are going to affect the water sources for these facilities. On top of that, the department has, by our calculations, probably about $80 million in deferred maintenance backlog. And the price tag for replacing Rock Creek is probably, we've seen estimates between $25 and $30 million. And I think that the question, it's a policy question that should be asked by the commission, involving the affected communities and stakeholders, to think what is the best use. If we're going to spend $25 million, even if some of that money is from insurance and the federal government, is that the best use of the money? We don't even know if the requirements under these insurance policies or FEMA are that you have to actually replace stick by stick what burned. But Oregon should have a conversation about what is possible. And you particularly look at the North Umpqua, it's a wild fish stronghold. With the creation by Congress of the Frank and Jean Moore Steelhead Conservation Area on Steamboat Creek, the strong wild runs, both spring chinook and coho, winter steelhead, and summer steelhead are a bit at a low level right now. But it is a wild fish stronghold. And the question is, what would be the best use of the money? What's the best way to let wild fish perform? And we would hope that the commission and the department would have a broader conversation. Obviously, you need to meet deadlines when you're trying to apply for funding, for disaster funding. So that is prudent, and we support that to make sure we're getting in line and dotting our I's and crossing our T's with the insurance company, with DAS, and with FEMA. But there should be a concurrent discussion thinking about what else is possible, looking forward and looking at the whole system to evaluate the risks.
Dave, thank you. If we can, are there other questions, Commissioner Woolley?
No, that's all that I have. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave, and to you as well, Mike, for bringing those to us. And we will, of course, take those into consideration or under consideration. So thank you very much. Let's move on then, Commission, to the minutes from the November meeting. And are there any revisions to those? Welcome back, Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde, by the way.
Thank you. I could hear everything. I just,
Lost
so
connection.
fun. No power.
Thank you. Then if there are no revisions, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the November meeting?
I move to approve the November 13th, 2020 meeting minutes with continued authority to correct grammar and punctuation.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from the November meeting. Are there any questions or comments? If not, those in favor? Thumbs up, please. Looks like everyone. All right. Then that one is, Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde, were you a thumbs up on that one, or is it a thank you? then it's unanimous on that one. And let's move to item B, Exhibit B, which is the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund Advisory Committee project approval. And Davia Palmieri will be presenting on this one. So Davia.
Good morning, Chair Wall, Director Melcher, and members of the Commission. For the record, I'm Davia Palmieri. I'm the Conservation Policy Coordinator in the Director's Office for the department. And your agenda says that our Chair of the Advisory Committee, Dr. Carl Wenner, will be with us, but he's actually on his way to a hunt with his son in John Day. So you just have me today. And we're going to be talking about some expenditure recommendations from the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund, and a relatively straightforward commitment of restricted gifts to existing Conservation and Recreation Fund projects. So I'll just start with a quick reminder for you all and the members of the public about the Conservation and Recreation Advisory Committee. The members are listed here, and this committee's been in existence since March of this year. They've done all of their work virtually, meeting sometimes twice a month, sometimes once a month, to stand up this Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund program. Another important reminder for everyone is that this Conservation and Recreation Fund program is heavily reliant on public fundraising. So we encourage everyone to visit oregonisalive.org to learn more about the program itself, how to donate, and the projects that we have funded to date. And something that I can't help but mention every time we talk about this is the volume of support that we have out there from this coalition of organizations that has been supporting the creation of the fund and then supporting the fundraising campaign from there. Recognizing that 2020 has been a really hard year for a lot of our nonprofit partners. They've been helping us in the ways that they can. And so finally on the update is just where we are in this fundraiser. You may recall that the original legislation set aside $1 million of general fund that would be given to the department to spend through the Conservation and Recreation Fund if and only if we raised $1 million from the private sector. That special appropriation was eliminated during the special session on COVID when all general fund special appropriations were eliminated. And we have a commitment on the record from the Legislative Fiscal Office to match anything that we raise this biennium in the next biennium, which actually sets up an interesting new challenge on the fundraiser to raise as much as we can to meet that match. So you'll see here, we have just over $200,000 that has been raised to date. Nearly 100,000 of that from the checkbox on the electronic licensing system. Over 12,000 individual donors. And then the reason we're here today is to talk about these restricted gifts. We have of that $200,000, $77,500 in restricted gifts that we'll talk about today. And so this is just a reminder here. In September, the Commission approved expenditures from the Conservation and Recreation Fund for 8 projects. The 3 at the top here have been of particular interest to donors for some restricted gifts. And by that, I mean, we have a lot of excitement about the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund and what it can do, but high dollar donors, foundations, they have their priorities set multiple years in advance. So they want to help with the Conservation and Recreation Fund raising effort, but they also want to contribute to specific projects that make the most sense for their particular mission. And so you did see one of these in September from the Pew Charitable Trust, noticing that the Gilchrist Underpass Wildlife Directional Fencing Project is a much higher scale than the others that were approved in September. That included $60,000 of a restricted gift from Pew Charitable Trust. So zooming in on those 3 projects, the first 3 columns you see here are the same information from the last slide. And so what we're talking about today are these restricted gifts here in this column. So we've received $1,000 from the Starview Foundation out of Sisters to complete the funding for the Lynn Creek project. $5,000 from the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for the Gilchrist Underpass Wildlife Directional Fencing Project, $1,500 from Oregon Wild, and $10,000 from the Oregon Community Foundation for the feasibility study on restoring sea otters to the Oregon coast. So I'll just quickly summarize what these new funds will do. For the Link Creek project, the original requested amount for the project was $8,800. The advisory committee recommended $7,800 just to help fit in with the budget we had at hand. So a local donor there is really excited to fill in that $1,000 gap for them to finish the funding for the education coordinator on the project and support for Caldera, which is an organization that's really focused on environmental education for kids. And this project itself is a restoration project with Trout Unlimited in the Metolius system that explicitly is bringing youth from Portland and Bend and other metro areas out to the project to learn about restoration, learn about fish, and have fun, as you can see from this picture. The Gilchrist Underpass Wildlife Directional Fencing Project is a project. The primary applicant is Oregon Hunters Association, working with ODOT to install fencing on the recently created underpass on Highway 97 near Gilchrist. The total need for this project is nearly $1 million for the fencing and the installation of that fencing. So this additional $5,000 is going to cover that additional fencing and installation. And finally, on the feasibility study for restoring sea otters to the Oregon coast with the Alaka Alliance and their many partners, this additional amount will go towards completing the feasibility study, which we were originally investing in, and then an outreach and communications plan once the feasibility study is complete to help coastal communities in particular understand what was learned and the path forward. So we recommend approving these new expenditures from the Conservation Recreation Fund. And you'll see that we also recommend some language in a draft motion that will allow future restricted donations, should they arise, to be expended without having to come back to the commission to make that request. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Davia. And I don't see hands up yet, but I do want to thank you and the others who have worked on this and the committee, as well as all of these groups. The support is great to see, and people across the state who have been donating to this. Looks like we do have a question from Commissioner Labhart. I do have a quick question on the $1 million match, and I understand that there's a commitment to try to get that back. If we get the one for this biennium and it's not suspended, there's no sunset, does that, in your view, are you expecting that whatever is left from this biennium could roll forward?
Sure. Well, when you say whatever is left from this biennium, do you mean in our private funds raised?
No, what I meant was if we raise 200,000 or some significant amount, which we're making good headway on, and the emergency or the legislature matches that to 200,000, does the other 800 roll forward and a new $1 million come in for next biennium in the best scenario? Is that what you're expecting?
Thank you, Chair Wall, for the clarification. We don't really have an answer to that yet. And so legislatively, the creation of the program was for the 2019-2021 biennium. We have a sunset date for the end of this session. And so in the upcoming session, the department does have a legislative concept that extends our sunset by 2 years that would keep all of those funds available through the end of 2023. There's also many legislative concepts out there, potentially from the governor's office and from a few legislators that would either remove the sunset entirely or extend it in other ways, but also to put money back into the fund. So there's a couple options. One would be to just match the amount we've raised and then that would be the end of the general fund. The opportunity that we would like to pursue is to bring that $1 million back so that it could be released as we match it. So say we end up with $400,000 at the end of this biennium, we would hope that $1 million becomes available. We release 400,000 right away, and then that $600,000 is available to be matched through time as we raise that money. But it's
Great.
all uncertain at this point.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Commissioner Labhart.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Yeah, I was just going to elaborate on that too. There is a lot of moving parts that are going to be coming up in the legislative session. Representative Helm is taking the lead on a lot of those legislative concepts, the department is, and so we're just going to have to watch it really close. The positive thing is all the moving parts are moving in a real positive direction about we need to continue this program. We need to make sure that we have the funding for it. And so there's, we're going to have some testimony. In fact, myself and Carl and Davia are testifying before the House Natural Resources Committee on the 17th, Davia, just as an, is it 17th?
Or 15.
Yeah, okay. So on just a general information session to make sure that we keep this information at the attention of the legislature, and particularly Representative Witt's committee, because it's a good program and ought to continue. I'd like to just speak to this before we take a vote. And I'm mainly speaking to the audience that's watching this today. Is, you know, we believe pretty strongly on the committee, and I think the commission and the department believes pretty strongly that we're going to get the match from the legislature. We've listened to some testimony from Ken Rocco, who is a legislative fiscal office head, and he's indicated that that is their intent. And so when Davia talks about the $200,000+ that's raised, think about adding that double and the amount of projects that we can get. The committee, the advisory committee looked at 65 projects for $500,000. We're not going to be able to fund that. So you'll see in January, we're going to have about another 60,000 roughly projects. All of those projects that were submitted were tremendous projects that we'd like to fund. So as I said, probably in the last meeting in LeGrand, but I'll say it again in this meeting, you know, we've had 12,000 individual donors so far, $200,000 raised. It's the end of the year. Erica talked about how much more money is being raised because people are out recreating, people are out visiting nature, people are wanting to get out, they're COVID tired, and hopefully this will continue. By donating to this Conservation and Recreation Fund, a tax deductible donation, you can help restore some of the conservation things and recreation projects that need to be done. There's a lot of trails that need to be rehabilitated because of the forest fires. I just read where there's a butterfly that's potentially going to go on the endangered species list. There's pond turtles, there's sea otters. There's all kinds of things in the conservation community that never get funding from various sources. And so if you care about Oregon's fish and wildlife and recreation, and now's the time to donate to this project. It's a tax deductible donation. OregonIsAlive.org, or you can go on the ODF&W website, and when you get your license, you can click on a little box that adds a few dollars. We're looking at potentially getting some companies that may have a roundup at the cash register that would go directly to the Conservation and Recreation Fund. So there's some real opportunities out there. I call it relentless engagement. We just keep at it. And so instead of $200,000, maybe we can raise the whole $1 million and get that matched with another $1 million and do some really good projects. So if you're watching this, please consider that for your year-end donation. So, sorry for the plug, but have to do it.
Thank you. Commissioner Woolley, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great pitch, Commissioner Labhart. Thanks so much. I remember years ago there used to be a wildlife checkoff on tax returns. I don't know how many. I'm dating myself, but that was an opportunity at one time. So now here's another one. So thanks for promoting that. Just a couple of quick questions. Davia, on the Gilchrist Passage project, I mean, with the fencing, I mean, it's a big ticket item, and just wondering, are you getting any nibbles for additional? I know you can't say when something's not committed yet, but in terms of dedicated funding from other organizations or foundations? Have you been getting interest in that?
Chair Wall, Vice Chair Woolley, actually, the Oregon Hunters Association and their partners, which is a very long list of organizations that are working on this, including the Oregon Wildlife Foundation, they're quite close to the $1 million actually. And so we're hoping to execute an agreement with them in the next few weeks to transfer those funds. The Department of Transportation needs the money in hand before they can go to bid to know the actual true final cost. But they're ready to do that with the funds that they have in hand. And that includes other department funds, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and a lot of other sources.
Okay, that's great news. I think it's really attractive to a lot of organizations. It kind of brings a lot of different disparate groups together. I'm just appreciating or expressing my appreciation for the Equity Fund. I'm not sure if that's actually the name of it, but just the efforts to have funds available to expand and broaden the audiences that are getting out in the outdoors. And so I think that's going to be a good effort to just have a more inclusive funding process. So thank you, Mark, and the committee for creating that.
I might just add, sorry, I was going to bring this up, that in January, you're going to see 3 projects from the Equity Subcommittee that we're recommending for funding. So you'll see those in January.
Yeah. Okay. That's great, Mark. Thank you.
And Chair Wall, Vice Chair Woolley, if I may, there is still an opportunity to donate to the Oregon Non-Game Fund on your tax returns, and we encourage you to do that.
Oh, okay. I think I must have missed it. Thanks.
So Chair Wall, if it's okay, I'll make a motion if it's so timely.
It is timely because we don't have anybody signed up to testify on this. So, and it's explained in the motion that we have as a sample that this is both accepting these restricted donations, as well as acting on any further restricted donations that would come in.
So I would move to approve the increased expenditure for the 3 projects as recommended by the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Advisory Committee, with the continued authority for the advisory committee to expend restricted funds for any of these projects.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the increased expenditures. Is there a question? Any more comments? Anything else? Seeing none, those in favor of the motion, thumbs up, please, so we can see. Okay, thank you all. Everybody voted in favor of it. And thank you, Davia, for this and your work, and you too, Commissioner Laphart. This is great news. And I know that it's a lot of work for you to come back, but it's been kind of nice having this one, a good news item at each time. But this motion makes a lot of sense as a process. So thank you all. Then let's move to Exhibit C, Ceremonial Harvest by the Burns Paiute Tribe of Oregon. And Commissioner or Director Melcher, do we have any tribal elders that are hoping to comment today? I know they've come in the past and it didn't sound like they were coming today, but is there anybody?
No, Chair Wall, we do not have any tribal council members on the Zoom today.
Okay, thank you. Then Kevin Blakely and then Mike Galvin. So Kevin.
Good morning, Chair Wall. I want to double check that the screen is showing there with just the full slides, not with notes or everything.
It is on my screen, yes, and it looks like.
Okay, perfect. Chair Wall, Commissioners, Director Melcher, for the record, Kevin Blakely. I'm the Deputy Administrator for the Wildlife Division. We will have 2 presenters for this exhibit. Mike Galvin will join in just a bit and introduce himself. For my part, I will highlight the proposed rulemaking related to ceremonial and cultural use hunting tags for the Burns Paiute tribe. And the Burns Paiute tribe is a federally recognized tribe of the Northern Paiute Indians in Harney County with Aboriginal lands throughout most of Southeast Oregon and also in Northern Nevada. There are currently just over 400 enrolled tribal members, of which less than 200 actually call the reservation their home. The department began issuing hunting tags to the Burns Paiute tribe in 2019. The participation and response for the program has been great. Continued discussions ongoing with the Natural Resource Program and tribal council members, and as well as the local and department staff continue to collaborate with the Natural Resources Group and the council on a variety of natural resource projects. The issuance of hunting tags are limited to deer, elk, and pronghorn and are valid in a limited hunt area across specified seasons for each species. The hunt area would continue to include federal lands and Burns Paiute tribal lands, which are tribal trust and fee title lands in the Silvies Management Unit, and then that portion of the Malheur River Wildlife Management Unit that is north of the Highway 20. And then the Burns Paiute tribe also has some property they own known as the Jonesboro property that's just south of Highway 20 in the Malheur River unit. The permits that are provided go to the tribal authorities from the department, and then they issue those to the enrolled tribal members of the Burns Paiute tribe. The authorized hunters are required to carry the ceremonial harvest permit with them. They also have tribal identification that they're required to have. There is no additional department license or tag, and all the harvest of the deer, elk, and pronghorn are then annually reported back to us, just as we do our coordination meetings at the local level. The specific amendment for the subsection 150 of Division 43 here today are to increase the number of annual elk tags, going from 6 to 15. The Burns Paiute tribe, they can also request the continued 8 deer permits and 4 pronghorn permits. The bag limits for those tags are either sex, and with the limited number of tags on just these species, the harvest is certainly not likely to have any kind of a discernible effect or impact on the big game populations in the region. The expanded season dates outlined in the proposed rule for all the species go to the last day of the department unit-wide. Any legal weapon 100 series tags for deer, and then also to the end of the any legal weapon season for pronghorn in those 2 units. And then the permitted elk season, just to make it easy with a variety of different elk seasons to go on, we extend that season through November 30th. The Burns Paiute tribe, in our discussions with them over the last year, has been real communicative about their primary tribal use time period is during the fall for the hunting and ceremonial activities around that. And that was originally not included in the first outlay of the season. We did that process through an extension. So we did do that for a temporary rule before, but with how well that worked, we had very minimal input back from either non-tribal members, the sport hunters, no issues on the enforcement side. So we wanted to make that part of the permanent rule with this proposal. Additionally, during that extended ceremonial permit season for elk, because it does overlap some of the sport hunting seasons, there is a restriction for only using archery equipment in overlap with the non-tribal seasons to prevent harvest with the firearm when the elk are at their most vulnerable. And I think with that, the proposed rule also will continue the tribe, in this collaboration to harvest enough big game for ceremonial and culture uses, and again, expand that season to include that most significant cultural time period for them. Chair Wall, at this point, I'll transition over to the fishing component. I'll continue to run the slides, but I can certainly address any questions that you have on the hunting tags now if you'd like.
I don't see hands up yet, Kevin. I do want to comment. Your slides were particularly informative, and the one that showed the size of the reservation area going from 1.5 million acres to 760 acres, I think it was informative, and I have to say stunning that the decrease was that big. So stunning. I appreciated seeing it, but I just hadn't realized it was that big a drop in the size. So let's keep going. There is a hand up. Commissioner Spellbrink.
Chair Wall, hey, Kevin. Yeah, I already talked to Kevin about this, but I just thought I'd address, I did get some calls with concerns that the use of the additional big game tags would be abused and affect the quality of the tribal hunting in those areas, which is I think, fairly good quality hunting in those areas. But after my conversation with Kevin and everything, I felt pretty good about it when we were done, that everything will be enforced, and anyway, I came away with, I'll support it after talking to Kevin.
Thank you. Then let's go to, Commissioner Zarnowitz. One more question.
Yeah, I just am curious about a little bit more history on how many years have we been issuing tags?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Zarnowitz, under these administrative rules, this will be the third year coming up. We issued the tags in 2019 and 2020. Prior to that, they did not have any ceremonial and cultural use tags issued by the department. They would have been required, and they certainly do. A number of the tribal members participate in the normal sport seasons as a licensed hunter. But in this case here, it was just for a couple of years now.
And on your map, the darker orange there, it says Indian lands. That's privately owned Indian lands, or what is that?
Yeah, Chair Wall, Commissioner Zarnowitz, those are lands that the tribe owns. Those lands there are part of the lands that were some mitigation properties through Bonneville Power Administration that they have purchased, and they manage for in alignment with some objectives and management plans on the ground.
Okay, so they actually have access to much larger lands than just their reservation as well. And I know they can hunt anywhere in that area, but so they've been able to restore some of their native lands, it looks like, over time.
Yeah, Chair Wall, Commissioner Zarnowitz, the hunting area is all the federal lands. So the hashed lands there are the federal, primarily U.S. Forest Service and BLM lands. And those are the lands. And that for the state of Oregon, as we work with a number of our tribes in this fashion through administrative rule, that is consistent for our other tribal sovereign nations as well that we interact with. And in regards to, the larger area that I showed on the other map, it's even more stunning than that. That, of course, was a initial diminished reservation from lands that they were Aboriginal on, which would have covered that entire map.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's go to Mike.
Good morning, Mike Govan here. I'm the Recreational Fisheries Program Manager for the department. Thank you, Chair Wall, Commissioners, Director Melcher. I'm going to do the second half of this presentation. Actually, you did see these rules that I brought earlier this year in August, and there was an error where they actually weren't incorporated into the OARs at the time. So we wanted to make sure that we brought this back to you today so that we can get this solidified in rule for 2021. The issue here is that we want to add a permanent rule to Division 21, which are the Southeast Zone regulations of the OARs. to adopt rules associated with this fishery that has been developed for and with the Burns Paiute tribe in the Malheur River. This rule has been in place under temporary rule for the past few years. Actually, this began back in 2016. Next slide, Kevin. So the area where this fishery will occur is on the main stem Malheur River, and that circled area there on the map on the left just gives you a general sense of where that occurs. But it basically will occur from the confluence of Blue Bucket Creek, which you can see that red star at the bottom end of that map, and upstream to the headwaters, of the Malheur River. This includes some of the smaller tributaries as well as they flow into the main stem Malheur. This incorporates approximately a 20-mile section of river, and the fishery will occur from June 1st through August 31st. And ODF&W, we continually work closely with the tribe to coordinate the transport and release of approximately 200 hatchery spring Chinook salmon that come from the Willamette hatchery. Again, this has been going on since 2016, and it's become a very, very popular activity, opportunity for the tribe as they're able to engage in traditional methods of salmon harvest. All the fish that are released into this area are again all hatchery fish, and they're all males. So the intent is that they are all harvested and taken out of the river. But if any do not get harvested, they won't be able to spawn. As you know, this section of the river is cut off from any current salmon passage, as if you were to come in the correct way, you'd come up Snake River to get to the Malheur, and Hell's Canyon Dam is in the way there. So this is an experimental fishery where we put the fish in this section, and then the tribes come in and utilize their traditional methods of harvest. And as you can see from some of the photos and the slides here, it's really bringing this back to younger generations as well. So it's a really unique and interesting and very well appreciated opportunity. Next slide. Kevin, there you go. So if there's any questions, we can answer any questions on the fishery. And if not, we can, I'd like to present the staff recommendation to amend Chapter 635, Divisions 43 and 21 for the ceremonial hunting and fishing opportunities by the Burns Paiute tribe.
Thank you, Mike. I don't see questions yet from the commissioners, but I had one that I just wanted to check in, and I understand that these are all male and all hatchery fish involved. And you mentioned in your staff report, it's in the background that they're all hatchery, but the rule doesn't actually say, doesn't reference hatchery. Was that on purpose, or just we feel like we don't need to say hatchery because the natural ones aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, that more the latter, Chair Wall. There are no salmon that currently exist in that area, in that section of the river anywhere. We certainly can make that modification if needed, but because there are no wild fish present, just using the general term, spring Chinook salmon is appropriately covers any impact because there are no wild fish up there.
Just because we forget over time, maybe we could add that reference to the rule language. But I want to ask: does that is that a speed bump for developing these rules if we add that and just clarify that these are hatchery fish that are in this fishery?
Actually, Chair Wall, this is Kurt, and I guess I would advocate against that, and for one reason, and that is that typically when we refer to a season for hatchery fish, it requires that the unmarked, the fish without an adipose fin clip are released. And in this case, of course, we're taking hatchery surplus male fish, but there are instances, I think, at our hatcheries due to quality control at the time of marking, where there can be some hatchery spring Chinook that do not have a fin clip. And so without fully considering the proposal add the word hatchery, I would recommend that we not do it at this time, but open to other thoughts.
No, that's okay. And we would continue to use only male fish in this, right?
Chair Wall, that is correct. We are transporting only male fish so that there is no reproduction, if you will.
Director Melcher, is that just to prevent confusion so that people won't mistake these for natural fish?
No, Chair Wall and Vice Chair Woolley, it's because Willamette we're using Willamette stock hatchery spring Chinook, which are not, spring Chinook are endemic in the upper Snake River Basin. They were certainly genetically much different than Willamette stock fish. So in order to provide this fishing opportunity for the tribe, we elect to use only male spring Chinook so that we don't have any reproduction. And then, of course, at our hatcheries, males are more typically in surplus than females.
Okay, thanks.
We also have a question from Commissioner Hatfield Hyde and then Commissioner Spellbrink.
Oh, hi. I didn't realize I had a question. I did have a comment though, just to say that I appreciate this and would be happy to make a motion on it.
Okay, we may be right back to you after Commissioner Spellbrink. Your question?
Yeah, not a question, just observation. One is, the biology of spring Chinook. These are probably fairly good quality fish too, because, the spring Chinook tends to, run up in the spring and early summer, and they don't spawn until early fall. So they're usually a pretty good quality eating fish too. And then the bucks, having been a fish my life, the bucks tend to be a little better quality and hold their quality longer than the females too. So it's probably win-win on that too, just an observation.
Thank you. We don't have public testimony, so if there is a motion on this one, that would be great.
Okay, I would move to amend OAR Chapter 635, Division 043 and 021 for ceremonial hunting and fishing opportunities by the Burns Paiute tribes as proposed by staff.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to amend OAR Chapter 635 as read by Commissioner Hatfield Hyde and seconded by Commissioner Zarnowitz. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, those in favor? Looks like all 6. So thank you to the presenters and commissioners. It's 10 o'clock. Let's take a 15-minute break, or actually let's come back at 10:15 and then we'll have a right at the quarter hour, and we have one a regular agenda item, then we'll temporarily adjourn to do executive session, and then we'll come back into regular session. So see you in 15 minutes. Thank you. Bob, are we back on air?
This is Kristen, and yes, you are.
Okay. Hi, thank you. It looks like we have the commissioners back, so. Okay, I think everybody's back, so we can go ahead and get started with Exhibit D, which is the 2021 groundfish fisheries regulations and the nearshore logbook report. And Maggie Summer is presenting on this one. So go ahead, Maggie.
Thank you very much, Chair Wall. Good morning, Commissioners, Director Melcher. I confirm that you can see the title slide.
Yes.
Great, thanks.
At least I can.
Good, thank you very much. I appreciate the timing of the break right before this. So I'm Maggie Summer, Marine Fisheries Manager with the Marine Resources Program here in Newport, here with your annual groundfish exhibit, starting with a frequently realistic view of fishing off the Oregon coast. As usual, I can put my slides to advance. There we go. This exhibit has two parts: an informational report on our commercial nearshore fishery and logbook program, and then rulemaking for 2021 groundfish fisheries. Jumping right into the nearshore fishery report, we report annually to the Commission based on a requirement in the legislation that established the commercial nearshore fishery permit and logbook program beginning in 2004. So we take the opportunity to talk to you a little bit briefly during this exhibit about our commercial nearshore fishery. But as I have been doing in past years, I do want to highlight that our staff responsible for managing this fishery produce a very detailed annual report on the fishery, summarizing data not just from the logbooks, but from fish tickets and our biological sampling programs. That's available on our website and contains information on landings and effort by port or port group, by year, condition, whether the landings were live or dead, gear type, average landings per vessel, etc. It also has information on the biological samples we're collecting, as well as some appendices with a history of annual catch limits and trip limits in this fishery since 2004. And much of this information is presented in graphic form. So if you're a visual person, you might enjoy reading through that, and it's certainly very informative. So wanted to make sure to highlight that. Then I just have a few slides to talk about the fishery to you today. While the report I just highlighted and the logbook information we have is only for the last full year of fishery data, or 2019, we have permit numbers for 2020, so thought we might as well present those here. There are 111 total permits. The base permit is a black and blue rockfish permit. 67 of those have nearshore endorsements. So the base permit allows harvest of black, blue, and deacon rockfish, recalling that deacon were distinguished from blue rockfish based on some genetic work that our program participated in a few years ago, up to certain levels. And then the nearshore endorsement also allows harvest of other nearshore species other than black, blue, and deacon, in addition to black, blue, and deacon, sorry, up to specified limits as well. The bar chart on the right of this slide gives you a sense of the geographic distribution of permits, going from north on the left of the graph to south on the right. You can see that the largest number of permits are concentrated on the South Coast, particularly in Port Orford, and as well as the largest number of nearshore endorsed permits. This slide just gives you an overview of what has happened to permit numbers over time since they were initially issued in 2004, with each bar representing a year. You can see that a number of permits that were initially issued in 2004 were not used and renewed that year. There is a requirement that the permits be used in order to be renewed, so there are no entirely latent permits existing for this fishery. After the initial period, permit numbers have been relatively stable, occasional attrition of a permit or maybe two per year, but in general, very, very stable. The maps on this slide give you a picture of where the catch is coming from off our coast with the three panels from left to right, north, central, and south coast. And this reflects, again, the distribution of permits that you saw, with quite a bit of the catch coming off the south coast in the Port Orford area, as well as Gold Beach and Brookings. But you can see that there are some areas of nearshore fishery activity on the central coast, out of the Port of Newport, and then on the central and north coast as well. And this slide gives you a picture of landings broken down by species. So the vertical axis here is total pounds, and then each bar represents a year from 2004 to 2019. The different colors represent the different species or management groups within this fishery. You can see that there was a period of a little bit of up and down in the graph. The last 3 years, 2017, 18, and 19, have been really quite high catches and quite stable. They represent really quite high attainment of the harvest guidelines. That is due not only to strong market demand and fishing interest and effort, but also to the very responsive in-season monitoring and management we have put in place. Our staff responsible for managing this fishery have really done some good development on our in-season model that allows us to project catches under various scenarios and really provide as much opportunity to the fleet as possible to harvest up to the harvest guidelines without exceeding them. And so these past 3 years, the landings increase shown here, along with higher prices for nearshore species in recent years, have led to a significant revenue boost for Oregon's commercial nearshore fleet, with an average of $1.1 million in ex-vessel value per year in the 2017 to 19 period, compared to an annual average of about $885,000 in the prior 3 years before that. And you can see it had been trending down and is back up and stable. So good news for the fishery and our fleet. And moving into issue 2, the groundfish regulations section of this, we have a few different items for your consideration here. We have a brief recap of new federal rules for your consideration for adopting by reference, and then moving into our state harvest guidelines and management measures for the commercial and recreational fishery. The federal rules, which the Commission normally adopts by reference, include some updated catch limits based on stock assessments and adjustments to federal management measures such as sector allocations, trip limits, etc. These are determined by the Pacific Fishery Management Council, on which ODFW has a voting seat, and there's opportunity for public participation in that process as well. One notable item for our fisheries is the opportunity to combine recreational long leader fishing for midwater rockfish with all depth halibut fishing, and I'll return to this in the recreational section of this presentation. So moving on to state rules, the first step is to adopt harvest guidelines for each sector by allocating the overall limit for Oregon to each. And as a reminder, the harvest guideline adopted into rule doesn't necessarily require closing a fishery when it's hit, but it is a target. If we are approaching the harvest guideline, we will evaluate the situation in terms of harvest overall for that species against its annual catch limit. We'll look at progress in the other sector for species with which we share annual catch limits with our neighboring parts of our neighboring states. We will consult with them, et cetera. So we do try to keep catch under our sector harvest guidelines, but it is not necessarily a hard cap. This slide shows the recent and recommended harvest guidelines, and the same proportions have been used to determine those since they were originally adopted, with only some housekeeping changes when species were moved between management categories. The sector allocation column shows those proportions. The 2020 harvest guideline column shows what the HG is this year for reference, and the 2021 column shows the recommendation for next year. And those values result from applying those same proportions to the overall Oregon limits that result from the federal process. You can see that the harvest guidelines for blue and blue and deacon rockfish, nearshore rockfish, and greenling are declining slightly. This is due to a built-in buffer for increasing uncertainty as the projections of sustainable catch levels from the last stock assessment as we get farther out in time from those assessments. Cabezon was assessed in 2019, and next year is the first year with harvest specifications based on the results of that assessment. You can see there's a small increase here, and then in subsequent years, we will start to see very slow declines based on the same uncertainty buffer I just mentioned ramping up. For commercial management measures, the fishery goals are really the same as they have been in the past. We are attempting to maximize opportunity without exceeding catch limits. And it is important in this fishery to have a predictable year-round season. We also heard interest in our public meeting this year. As we have before, this is not new, but really heard it emphasized this year, some interest in higher black rockfish opportunity in the summer based on the pattern of market demand over the year. We use several tools to manage this fishery. Of course, the limited entry permit system caps the total potential number of participants. And then you adopt cumulative vessel landing limits known as trip limits for each vessel for each 2-month period, which moderates the pace of progress toward the overall harvest guideline in this fishery. Before we get into the management measures recommended for next year, I just have a quick recap on how this year went. We saw very low landings relatively of black and blue rockfish black rockfish and cabezon in particular. Black rockfish tends to go to restaurant markets, to fresh seafood markets. And of course, many of those were impacted by COVID-related closures and declines in activity. So much lower market demand for black rockfish in particular this year. We did raise trip limits in season in order to provide the opportunity to harvest more of these species if any of the fishers were able to find a market for those. Since we were not at any risk of exceeding the harvest guideline. Conversely, we saw very high landings of other nearshore rockfish. Markets remained strong and stable for these. Recall that a lot of the other nearshore rockfish are going live. They tend to go to markets, for example, in the San Francisco area, very different than the local markets, I'd say, for our black rockfish that's going to fish and chips meals, et cetera. Catch per trip this year of other nearshore rockfish was also higher than it has been in prior years, probably because that's what buyers wanted. So fishermen focused only on those species. And then we did need to reduce the trip limits in season this year, and we will be recommending starting with a lower trip limit next year in order to remain under the harvest guideline. And you'll see that recommendation coming up. So these present the trip limits overall with the split out by species or management group. The first column shows what the trip limits we started with this year. And then the middle column shows what we're ending with after the in-season changes. And the right-hand column shows what we're recommending for 2021, which is based on our modeling and public input. And I'll note one of the goals we have for this fishery is to have a predictable and stable season, but we do monitor closely in season, as I mentioned earlier, and we can adjust limits if there's a conservation need to stay within the harvest guideline, or if there's opportunity to provide more access without exceeding the harvest guideline. The last commercial item is a housekeeping one. As described on the slide here, when rules were modified several years ago in 2017 to clarify a requirement to be eligible to transfer a nearshore endorsed permit to a new vessel, the updated language did not specify that the requirement only applies to nearshore endorsed permits and not to black and blue rockfish permits without a nearshore endorsement. The statute that created these permits established the transfer requirement only for the endorsed permits, and we recommend making the clarification in rule language now. The text, I'll note, is in the attachment 3 draft administrative rules for this. It's a minor change. Moving into the recreational section, We are also here continuing with the same goals to provide as much opportunity out on the water as possible without exceeding catch limits. It's really particularly important in this fishery to keep the season open all year. And then if possible, we have heard over the past few years that a bag limit of 5 is what people are really hoping for as an absolute minimum. So we are attempting to work with that. And then on the recreational side, the tools we use are bag limits, area closures, including depth contours, and a prohibition on retention of particular species when necessary. As in the commercial section, I have a quick recap of this year first. We started off with a 5-fish bag limit and 1-fish sub-bag limits. That means no more than 1 fish within the main bag. Could be either a copper quillback or China rockfish or a cabezon, noting that the cabezon season doesn't open until July 1st. We saw low effort in the spring on the north and central coast. There were a lot of boat ramps and access points, a lot of charter businesses that were closed due to COVID-19 measures after the Stay Home Save Lives order in the spring. And we saw an effect there, certainly on the north and central coast. And then we saw this really change as we moved into the summer. A lot of people turned to outdoor recreation, and we saw effort and catch pick up there. Certainly, I want to note that this is an overall overview, and individual businesses and anglers may have had a different experience than I'm describing here. On the south coast and the south central coast, effort remained high throughout. We didn't see a drop because most access points, marinas, and many charters remained open, although they had put safety measures in place. So I really saw a continuation of operations there. It stayed high. The series of lines on this slide show the total number of recreational groundfish angler trips as they accumulate over the year for the last 8 years, with each differently colored line representing a different year, and 2020 is in black. When looking at 2020 in aggregate like this, so coast-wide, this is all trips, whether it's on a charter vessel or a private boat, you can see that we started off fairly low. This was also due to consistently bad ocean conditions in January that kept recreational boats off the ocean. But then was low throughout the spring, probably a COVID-19 influence. And then you can see that it ramped up pretty steeply in the summer. Again, kind of hearkening back to some discussions about higher license sales that we saw, and really quite a bit of outdoor activity and outdoor effort. We saw the same in ocean fisheries this year. And I'll note that this slide shows data for 2020 only through the end of October. We have already exceeded the total number of groundfish angler trips than occurred throughout all of 2019. So overall, we are ending with another high year of groundfish effort. And then finally, in the recap, we made several in-season adjustments to the rules that we started with, increasing the general marine bag limit to 7 in July, since we were projecting to come in low on the black rockfish quota, recalling that black rockfish is the main driver of the bag limit in this fishery. We prohibited retention of China copper and quillback rockfish in July, since we were on track to hit the harvest guideline for the group that those species are the majority of. And we prohibited retention of cabezon in mid-August, also when we projected to reach the harvest guideline. This is the same time frame that's occurred in recent years. So returning to our key species, black rockfish, we're now projecting that we'll come in at about 350 metric tons of impacts for the year, or about 90% of the 389 metric ton harvest guideline for black rockfish in the recreational fishery. And then finally, I don't have a picture here, but just a reminder to listeners that we produce annual newsletters for the sport groundfish fishery, as well as the recreational halibut fishery, and those are available on our website. So for the recommendations for 2021 management measures, starting with the main course here, we're recommending a 6-fish bag limit. In 2017, 2018, and 2019, we started with 5-fish bag limits, and the total recreational catch of black rockfish was between 40 and almost 100 metric tons under the harvest guideline at the end of those years. We believe a 6 fish bag limit next year is likely to provide a stable season with a low risk of nearing the quota and requiring in-season action. Although, of course, we'll be monitoring it very carefully and will adjust as needed. Our ability to track and project catch in season in the recreational fishery, as I mentioned earlier for the commercial one, has also really improved over the last several years as our sport groundfish team have improved the modeling. And we've also increased outreach to the recreational fishing community. We recommend continuing with sub-bag limits for cabezon and copper china and quillback rockfish. And I'll just note here that the one for copper china and quillback rockfish is shown as a new addition in the addendum to attachment 3, the draft rules. It was erroneously omitted from the rules in the original attachment 3. It would not, however, be a change in practice for next year. It would be carrying that forward status quo from this year. Depth restrictions have been used for a long time to keep the fishery in relatively shallow waters when most of the effort is occurring, spring through fall, in order to minimize encounters with yellow eye rockfish and improve survival when yellow eye rockfish are released. As the yellow eye rockfish stock has been successfully rebuilding from overfish status, the quota has gone up slowly, giving our fisheries a little bit more breathing room. We have been slowly shortening the duration of the depth restriction in recent years, arriving at a 3-month period over the summer for 2020. I'll note that we and the other West Coast states are being very cautious about relaxing rules in ways that could increase yellow eye rockfish impacts. This species constrains almost every West Coast fishery, and a lessening of those constraints is very welcome, but our first priority is to ensure that the stock stays on the positive rebuilding trajectory. For 2021, we recommend continuing with the same timing and depth contour for this restriction, 40 fathoms from June through August. And the last item, as mentioned earlier, we have the opportunity now to allow long leader fishing for midwater rockfish on all depth halibut trips. Just a reminder that long leader gear is designed to keep hooks up off the bottom and away from yellow eye rockfish. And there's a separate bag limit of 10 midwater rockfish species only when using this gear. This applies only outside of 40 fathoms. We are recommending allowing the combination of long leader fishing on all depth halibut trips during the period of time when the bottom fifth depth restriction is in effect, when retention of groundfish is otherwise not allowed seaward of 40 fathoms. This change has been requested by anglers for the past several years. They'd like the opportunity to keep some rockfish when they're out on long offshore halibut trips. This would open up, this recommendation would open up some opportunity on those trips in the summer. The combination, I'll note, would not be allowed when bottom fish is open to all depths outside of that summer period, because the mixing of long leader and regular groundfish activity, those two have different bag limits, recall different species that apply. It could be confusing for anglers and difficult for enforcement. In addition, the draft rules, which we developed in consultation with Oregon State Police, Fish and Wildlife officers, specify that all halibut fishing must be completed first before rockfish are retained with long leader gear when the combination is allowed. Again, so there's no mix of bottom and midwater gear in use when rockfish are on board the vessel. Pardon me. There. And that actually concludes our recommendations. The summary is provided here for you. I won't read through it all. This simply covers the highlights of what I just presented. And I'll note again that attachment 3 with the addendum contains our recommendations for 2021 groundfish regulations. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Maggie. Great report. We have a question from Commissioner Labhart.
Yes, great report, Maggie. I apologize, I didn't get the slide number, but could you go back to the commercial slides and the one that talked about what happened in 2020? The 2020 recap
I passed it.
There we are. I think that's it right there. The black, nope,
Nope.
the one that had the bar graphs.
Let me just get myself out of here.
There
This,
we are.
this one.
And, in talking to the fleet, of course, we know the nearshore landings been pretty stable for 2019. And then you showed another graph for your prediction for 2020. Can you go to that one? It showed what's happening in 2020. Yep, there we are. So low demand for black rockfish, and so we know that we're probably still going to have restaurant closures through at least part of the year 2021. What are you hearing from the fleet? Is this landings, where we're having record high landings for rockfish, but low landings, historic lows for black rockfish and cabezons, market demand, those kind of things. Do you see that continuing in 2021 at that projection or prediction for at least part of the year, half the year, or what are you hearing from the fleet?
Thanks, Commissioner Lebhart. Good question. Hearing a lot of concern from the fleet as well as from buyers. I think that earlier in the year, we, even into the early fall, I think there was a little more optimism. Obviously now as we've gotten into the winter and the COVID situation is not improving as hoped, there's a lot of concern about how it will affect markets and demand and opportunities for fishing. So I think that we probably are going to look at a period of some continued COVID-related constraints on demand, especially for those species that go to local go to restaurant markets, go to local seafood markets, et cetera. And that's something that we will be considering as we continue with our in-season monitoring and look for opportunities to adjust trip limits. But of course, we can only do so much there with rulemaking, and a lot of the opportunity is just going to depend on demand and what the market for seafood products is doing next year.
So is it, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Is it fair to say then, if we approve the staff recommendation, which is pretty close to status quo, that likely, at least through part of 2021, they'll be significantly or partially under that recommendation? In other words, we have a cap, and given COVID situations and market conditions, that we might be under that because of what we're seeing on the chart right here. Is that fair to say, or do you have another opinion on that?
Thank you, Commissioner Lebhart. Getting out my crystal ball, I think that's probably fair to say. I know there are some efforts among the fleet to really try to work on expanding their markets. Some folks are really interested and have been trying to set up some direct to consumer sales, or just looking for ways to get their product out there. But I would expect probably some similar conditions in terms of black rockfish market demand for 2021, at least in the initial part of it. And again, we will be monitoring if our model in season projects that we are going to come in under the commercial harvest guideline, we can increase the trip limits. But of course, the buyers impose limits on the vessels based on the amount of fish they think they can move and sell. And those are often lower than what the regulatory limits are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and don't read anything into it that I'm going to propose anything different. I just wanted to get your opinion on what it would look like. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Labhart. Commissioner Spellbrink.
Hi, Maggie. Again, yeah, good report. On a clarification, I think I had a call yesterday late on the I believe it was sport fish anyway, but on the black cod, as I I think this individual, I think it was Terry Thompson, he said he called in last year to see what the limit was. He thought it was like 25 fish on black cod. When some black cod had moved in closer to shore, they were catching them. And he said he was told by, he called ODF&W and they told him that the black cod limit would be lumped in with your ground fish limit. So I believe that would be like 6 this year or whatever. Is that true? He was looking for clarification that he was surprised that the black cod was lumped in with the rockfish.
Thanks very much, Commissioner Spellbrink. Yes, that is correct. Black cod or sablefish are part of the general marine bag limit that applies to ground fish. So for next year, it would be 6 fish if the commission adopts the staff recommendation.
Okay, so yeah, so it would be, if you had 2 black cod, it'd be 2 of your 6, right?
Correct.
Commissioner Zarnowitz.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Maggie. On this chart that you have up, I'm sorry, I might have missed some stuff because somebody drove up and knocked on our door. So that distracted me for a few minutes. What did the department raise the in-season trip limits through temporary rule? Is that how that's done? Or I don't remember any, or how is, we went from in 2020, a certain number, and then the trip limits are higher in some cases and quite a bit lower in others. Can you explain that?
Commissioner Zarnowitz, thanks. You are correct. Yes, we do that through temporary rule. And so comparing the 2020 trip limits from the outset to after in-season changes shows you what the changes we made in season are that were adopted through temporary rule. And then our recommendations for next year are in some cases more similar to what we're ending up this year with. And you can see for black rockfish, for example, we made some substantial increases toward the middle and end of this year and are recommending those increases, similar, not all the way up to the same levels, but increases also for next year there.
Okay, and then I have another question. Your explanation was a lot clearer than the way the rule's written to me anyway. Let's see, it's the part of the rule that's talking about the being able to fish for rockfish, having the long leader line at the same time as with halibut. And I probably read these rules on page 6 and 7, but particularly page 7, about 10 times. And if I were out there fishing, of course, I'm not a regular fisher of these type of fish, I would have been very confused about whether I was allowed to do something or not allowed to do something. So is there a way to make that rule clearer?
Commissioner Zarnowitz, thanks. That is an excellent question. Yes, our sport groundfish team have already been working on outreach materials that are much more clear and plain language, including some graphic depiction of what you can do at what times of year. In terms of this combination, they have gotten input on that from other staff in our program who work frequently with the public. We'll get some input from fishermen before we finalize it. We've run it by the Oregon State Police as well to make sure that it is as clear as possible, because yes, the rule language can be challenging to interpret, particularly for your average fisherman. You know, if I was trying to go out fishing and that was my reference source, I would find it challenging. So absolutely, we will be producing much more simplified information, and it will be available both on our website, and we'll have a paper handout that our dockside port samplers can provide to anglers as well.
Okay, that will certainly help for sure. Thanks. Thank you. Oh, I guess I had one more, and that was Cabazon. It looked like you were allowing, we were going to propose allowing a lot more tonnage on Cabazon, yet we had to shut the season down last year. So is that something that really should be done if we had to have to wind up shutting the season down periodically?
Thanks, Chair Zarnowitz. Of course, the real conservation measure for Cabazon is the overall annual catch limit. And then for each sector, the harvest guideline that you adopt. Within that, the trip limits are responding to the amount of effort and catch that there has been. And they are our best attempt at setting up those trip limit levels pre-season that will result in a smooth fishery throughout the year. So we did see higher catch rates on Cabazon. In particular, a few years ago, we saw a larger average size that was seemed to be indicative of certain year classes moving through the fishery and kind of aging up and getting larger. That may have been a factor. Market demand, of course, also really varies by species within the fishery. We saw some lower demand for Cabazon last year. So we will see how it goes next year. Again, based on the public input we've received and our modeling, we think that what we're recommending is a good trip limit for next year that will keep us under the harvest guideline, but if needed, we can adjust in season.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Spellbrink, you had your hand up again a minute ago. Do you still have another question or comment?
No, I lowered my hand there too. I really appreciated too the page 22 there as far as clarification on that. It made it a lot. That's a good handout probably right there to have. That really clarified it for me also.
I have a question and comment.
Go ahead, Commissioner Woolley.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Maggie. How are you? So my question is, well, I was wondering what proportion of this fishery is shipped out of state? What proportion of the landings are shipped out of state? You mentioned fish heading to San Francisco, a larger number of live fish. And, you know, if I were to conjecture, I would say it has to do with the Asian buying market there that have preference for live, purchasing live seafood. A trip to Chinatown in San Francisco, one can see live frogs, live turtles, a whole range of things for purchase. So I'm just wondering how, kind of what percentage approximately is going out of state, and just your thoughts on why there are more live shipments going down south.
Thanks very much, Commissioner Woolley. We actually don't have data on the final destination of these fish. So we know anecdotally that certainly some, maybe a large portion of them, are going to markets out of state on San Francisco. There are also some in the Portland area, but we don't have information on where the fish go once they are purchased by the first receiver here in Oregon.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions, Commissioner Woolley?
No, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Maggie, I have several questions, a couple general ones, and then 3 or 4 more specific ones. This seems like a fishery that's the management is quite nuanced, and then allows us to be able to be very careful about the trend lines on fish like the yellow eye and others, which is terrific. My general question, my first one is, how are you and your staff looking at climate change impacts and building those into the harvest recommendations and regulations?
Thanks, Chair Wall. That's a great question. I would say the primary point that climate change impacts will come in is in the stock assessments for these species, which are generally conducted and led by fishery scientists from the National Marine Fisheries Service. For nearshore stocks like these, our staff have been participating on the stock assessment team. So it really is a team effort. When the stock assessments are conducted, obviously some of the information they are using is on the biology of the stock, the productivity of the stock, timing of reproduction, et cetera. A number of those things will be affected by changing ocean conditions. In many cases, we don't yet have a lot of information there to be able to bring into a stock assessment. There is certainly research going on the West Coast that we are tracking and aware of, looking at some changes in fecundity, in reproductive patterns and timing, in growth and natural mortality, et cetera, based on ocean conditions. But I would say it's not to the point yet where we can directly bring that into the fishery management process. It is something that there's a lot of interest in. In terms of the agency's in-season management of this fishery that I've described throughout this presentation, I think there is less of a role for considering climate change impacts in the actual in-season management, which is where we are simply trying to adjust the opportunity within the fishery to stay within that year's harvest guideline, but provide as much opportunity up until that.
So just to follow up on that, and I think you answered part of this question already, but how is our management different because of what we know now about climate and ocean change than how are those changes happening? What are the changes in our management?
Thanks, Chair Wall. I would say, again, it comes in both in the stock assessment, and I would say also in decisions on catch limits that are derived from that stock assessment. And those are made at the Pacific Fishery Management Council level. The council certainly has a large effort to understand and work on incorporating climate change and ocean conditions as we consider fishery management as the Pacific Fishery Management Council considers regulation and management. But I would say, one thing I have seen is probably an increased precautionary approach to setting catch limits. Really a lot of increased awareness of the importance of buffering for uncertainty in terms of changes that might be happening to the stock in the environment, as well as in fishing effort.
Thank you, that's really helpful. A few more specific ones. On the long leader fishing, how will we monitor the impacts? If we change that, as you suggest, how will we know if it's working over time?
Thanks, Chair Wall. We monitor primarily dockside through our dockside sampling program, where our biologists are interviewing anglers as they return from fishing trips, and they will ask what types of gear did they use, what species were they targeting, and they will examine their kept fish and ask about fish that were released. So we are really relying on anglers to report accurately on fish that they released. That has always been the case. We do have a much smaller at-sea observation program where we send biologists out to ride along on some charter vessels. That we suspended that in 2020 because of COVID concerns, and that may be the case in 2021. But we're not, the data we collect from that is generally not it's not the primary source of information for our in-season monitoring. Our dockside sampling and interview information really is. So we will be able to tell which trips had this new combination, how much yellow eye rockfish came from those trips, and compare that to trips that were separated and didn't have the combination, and look to make sure that we are not increasing overall yellow eye rockfish impacts by an unacceptable amount. And just for context, the modeling we were able to do, given that it hasn't happened before, we haven't had this combination before, there's some uncertainty there, but we think that it's likely to result in about 0.2 metric tons or less of additional yellow eye rockfish impacts. So it should be quite small.
Great. Just to follow up on your comment about observers, why is that not a bigger part of our data, if you will, or our perspective on what's happening with the fishery? If those are observers that from our staff or the federal staff that are on those boats and they're making informed observations, presumably, why is that not a more useful source of information?
Well, thank you, Chair Wall, and thank you for the opportunity to clarify remarks. That is a very useful source of information. For the recreational side, we have observers only on a relatively small number of charter trips. We target about 100 per year. Those are charter businesses that volunteer to take our samplers on board with them. And the information that those at sea observers collect, particularly biological data on released fish, is very valuable in the stock assessments. It is not a large enough sample to be very informative for our in-season tracking and monitoring in terms of landed catch and reported total bycatch. We get much more information from our dockside sampling program. It's pretty effort intensive, and there are challenges with getting out on recreational vessels of all types. I do want to note that on the commercial side, there are federal observers on commercial fleets. The percent coverage varies depending on the fishery and the fleet. There are different rules for that, but those data from those observers are also extremely important, both for stock assessment and overall accounting in that fishery, or in those commercial fisheries.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions. One is the nearshore landings from the commercial fishing seems to have steadily increased, at least in the chart, from about 388,000 to 633,000. Is that more fishers, more technical equipment? What does that steady increase over the years, what do you attribute that to?
Thank you, Chair Wall. And can I make sure I am?
It's the chart that has the yearly numbers further back, I believe. I think it goes at the bottom, or actually, I think it was one that might have only been in your report. It's on the ticket sales, or the ticket pounds. Nearshore landings from commercial fish tickets.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Wall. Thank you.
It's on page 3 of your report, and it looks like a fairly steady progress from 388 up to 633.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification, Chair Wall. Yes, that is really, for the most part, an increase in attainment of the catch limit, the overall harvest guideline for this fishery over the years, as markets have increased, prices have increased some, and as I mentioned earlier, our ability to adjust the rules in season because of the kind of responsiveness and speed of our monitoring and management have really allowed fishermen more access to the full harvest guidelines. So that's primarily reflective of an increase in the attainment of the overall catch limit. Certainly the catch limits have varied a little bit over the years, as we have several new stock assessments over that time frame have come into play. But that's primarily it.
Thank you. And on the recreational side, is there any kind of, on the commercial side, we have limited entry with our permit system. On the recreational side, as more people are getting involved, do we have any kind of either a limit on the number of those other than the bag limit, of course, or do we have a good idea of the increased pressure from the increasing numbers?
Thanks, Chair Wall. For recreational groundfish fisheries, we have not used any means to limit the total number of potential participants. So anybody who buys a fishing license can go fishing. We do track the, what we get from our data is the number of angler trips. That doesn't directly tell us the number of individual anglers. Of course, I could go fishing 10 times, during the year, and that would count as 10 angler trips. We can do some, we could look at some different sources of data together and come up with an estimate of that. But certainly it's the overall number of angler trips that is the key measure of pressure on the resource that we're seeing. But overall, no restriction on how many potential recreational groundfish anglers there are.
Okay, thank you. And that's it on my questions. I do want to just comment that as I was reading this, it seems, as I said at the start of my questions, it does seem like that you're able to do nuanced management of this fishery because you have quality information, and I think that's terrific. This fishery seems to have close enough contact or information that you can make multiple in-season changes. And I know that's not perfect, but given the COVID skewing, if you will, of just about everything, including this market and this fishery, it does seem to me that, at least as I look at this, I have some concern about increasing the bag limit and increasing the bi-monthly trip limits, as well as the increase of the harvest guidelines for cabezon. And I think especially on the bag limit going to 6 rather than 5, because I think we have the ability to change those in season, and you've done that regularly, or it seems like you've done it regularly. But this, with a fast growing number of fishers and somewhat skewed demand and that sort of thing, at least as I'm looking at this, it makes sense to keep the bag limit at 5 until we get well into the season and know exactly what's going on. And it also, because having these fish on a rebound or as a stock increase seems like a great thing to do, and that weighs into how I think about this. But mostly it just seems like going with an increased bag limit and increasing the harvest guidelines and the bi-monthly trip limit for cabezon is quite a jump, and we don't know if we need it yet. So I would, at least as I'm looking at it, that's how I'm thinking about it. And so if you have any response, that's terrific. And otherwise, because I jumped into what I was thinking about this, I would ask the other commissioners if they have initial thoughts about how they're thinking about this rule. So any response from you first, and then I can go to the other commissioners.
Sure, thank you very much, Chair Wall. We have a lot of confidence in the overall annual catch limits, and that those represent a sustainable amount of fish that can be removed from the stock each year by fishing activities. Those are, as it talked about, based on stock assessments, and they are built in, there are built-in buffers. The stock assessment actually produces an estimate of maximum sustainable yield, and then the annual catch limit is reduced from that by an amount to account for things like scientific uncertainty, et cetera. So it is, there are very solid data that have gone into the assessments for, particularly for black rockfish and for cabezon, and we are comfortable with those overall numbers. And as long as we don't exceed those, we have no conservation concerns. So the trip limits in our minds and the bag limit really are just about how we provide opportunity to the fisheries during the year to access those amounts. And, you know, we are, as you noted, and we certainly agree, 2021 could be very different than our expectations based on COVID impacts that might be similar to what we've seen in 2020. They might be different. And that is one of the reasons that we will be monitoring both fisheries very closely, as I said, you know, which is an effort and resource intensive activity on both fronts, but it is, you know, it does allow us to be very responsive to these fisheries.
Thank you. And if I summarize that, what I think I just heard is you have a lot of confidence in the harvest guidelines as they are set, and the bag limit and trip limit are the tools that you can use. And so that's where we have some room to keep them as they are or change them.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners, what are you thinking, or do you have any additional questions?
I feel confident in Maggie and her team's assessment this time around. Normally I'm more on the cautionary side, but you know, I'm happy for the anglers to be able to have a little boost this time. And I mean, I feel comfortable that, you know, our staff can move quickly to make adjustments as the season progresses. You know, as you're saying, we have no idea what the next year brings. Ocean conditions change, and it looks like COVID restrictions will be continuing, you know, at least halfway through the year. So yeah, there are some uncertainties, but I mean, I feel confident this time around with a little bit higher catch limit moving forward.
Thank you. Other commissioners' thoughts?
This is Bob Spellbrink. I would tend to agree with Greg, I think, on this one too. I think they so closely watch and control this that if it looks like they're getting close to, you know, some of the caps or something, that they can certainly adjust, and have done a good job of doing that both directions. So I guess I would agree with Greg on this, that I think I would, you know, be acceptable to the raised bag limit to the 6 fish.
Okay. Any other thoughts or?
Assisting other patients.
I would agree with the previous two commissioners.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands up, I think that we could go to a motion if somebody would like to make one.
Chair Wall, did we have public comment? Was there any I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, we don't have testimony on this one either. Yeah.
Thanks.
We've had and I forgot to mention it, but we don't have anybody, so.
Okay, I'll make a motion if no one else is stepping forward. I would go with staff recommendation 1. And I'd move to adopt amend OIR Chapter 635, Division 004 and 039 as proposed by staff in Attachment 3. Just to highlight the parts of that includes the harvest guidelines for 2021 in metric tons, commercial nearshore bi-monthly limits for 2021, the commercial housekeeping, and the recreation bag limits and management measures for 2021.
And I would second that.
Thank you both. So we have a motion and a second to adopt the staff recommendations. And I'm not able to see everybody right now.
Chair, could I just add, as part of the motion, that the effective date, which is January 1, 2021, for the record.
Okay, now I can see everybody again. Then let's have if there are no more questions or comments, and I'm not seeing any hands up, could we have a thumbs up or down on the motion? So I see 5 of them up. I'm voting no on this one because I do think this is an important time not to increase the bag limits when we have the conditions that we do. But the motion passes, and Maggie, thank you very much for a great report. And we'll stop there. The next item is executive session. So we will close out of the regular meeting. And I have a question either for Director Melcher or our legal counsel. Is it most appropriate to read the executive session statement now, or do we need to read it when we get into the next one? Now?
Chair Wall, if you're speaking about what I'm saying, you actually say it when we arrive in executive session. Is it the one that's informing the press that they're not to report? Is that what you have in front of you?
Yes, that we are going into executive session.
I think it's fine to read it when we then enter into executive session.
Okay. Then as I understand it, the commissioners need to sign out of this meeting and sign into the executive session meeting that is a separate link on your computers. So we'll close the regular commission meeting now and come back